No, I think she's the director. Yeah, I think she's director.
Right, because of peace, and he must be the architect. He's an architect. The principal's the,
Yeah.
they want to build,
We should,
right?
interesting meeting that.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome you to the Hutchinson City Council meeting for Tuesday, April 23rd, 2019. Approve the council agenda and any agenda additions or corrections.
Mayor, Council, I don't have any additions or corrections at this time.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second that.
Motion by Mary, second by Chad to approve. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Implications from Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Good evening.
And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Our Father in heaven, we are grateful for this opportunity to gather together, grateful for the sacrifice of those that are before us, for the many hours they spend in learning issues and talking with citizens, grateful for their sacrifice. As we have also been able to celebrate the sacrifice of He that, our Savior, that came into this world. We are grateful for that Easter season. Again, this spring season we're able to celebrate too with the warmer days and warmer weather. We pray for a blessing upon those that are here in these quarters. Bless their hearts and their minds, that they'll be open to hear the words that will be presented before them. Bless those that are listening in other areas as well, that their understanding can be opened as well. We also ask a blessing upon this great city of Hutchinson. We are grateful for it, for those that serve not just here, but in every aspect in making this city wonderful, especially those that protect us and keep us from harm. Not just in the city we pray for blessings upon, but those of our national leaders. Bless them, bless their minds and their hearts as they look to do the best for as many as they can, both in civic areas and in military. We thank Thee for this land, for this free land, for those men and women that have given their all for that to be free. We pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance recognitions of gifts, donations, and community service to the city. Does anybody have anything tonight? Okay, got a couple things. We have a resolution number 15033, resolution accepting $25 donations from Lemoyne and Lois Grahams to the Hutchinson Police Department towards the Law Enforcement Memorial Park Fund.
Make a motion to accept.
Motion by Steve, second by Dave to accept. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. I do have a couple other things. In sad news, Ken Jensen and Elsa Young passed away this past week. Just note that Ken served on numerous boards and different things for the city. He also was on the planning commission board, so just pass that on, that they did pass away. And I do have proclamation for Kindness Celebration Day. Hutchinson is once again proclaiming May 1st as Annual Kindness Celebration Day. It is a day to focus on doing things for others and practicing kindness in most daily situations. Being kind or responding kindly to pertains to all ages, backgrounds, and viewpoints. People do not need to sacrifice their beliefs or stop being passionate of their cause to be kind to each other. The City of Hutchinson encourages each resident to consider what you, your family, church, neighborhood, or club can plan on this day to show kindness to others. Now therefore be it resolved that I, Gary T. Forcier, Mayor, proclaim May 1st, 2019 as Kindness Celebration Day. Alrighty, public comment. Anybody that wants to address the city council, just come forward and state your name and address. All right, approval of minutes, regular meeting minutes of April 9th, 2019.
I make a motion to approve them.
I'll second.
Motion by Chad, second by Mary to approve the minutes. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. All right, consent agenda. We'll do this with one motion unless somebody pulls something off for discussion. A is approval of issuing parade permit for Memorial Day Parade on May 27th, 2019. B is approval of issuing carnival permit to J&K Amusements, May 30th through June 2nd, 2019 at the Hutchinson Mall. C is approval of the 45th Annual Arts and Crafts Festival to be held September 13th and 14th, 2019 in Library Square. D is approval of Dairy Day celebration on June 7th, 2019. E is approval of Hutchinson J.C. Water Carnival request. F is approval of items for South Grade Road Corridor Improvement Project, letting number 2, project number 19-02. Under there, we have resolutions number 15035, resolution ordering preparations of reports on improvements, and resolution number 15036, resolution receiving reports and calling hearings on improvements. G is approval of items for the water treatment plant reverse osmosis membrane replacement, letting number 9, project number 19-10. And underneath there, we have resolution 15038, resolution ordering preparations of report on improvements, and resolution number 15039, resolution receiving reports and calling hearings on improvements. H is approval of resolution number 15032, resolution establishing location for a traffic control device. I is approval of change order number 1, levy number 15, project number 18-15, 2018 airport improvements. J is approval of resolution number 15034, resolution authorizing entering into a lease agreement with Compost Turner. K is approval of resolution number 15037, resolution approving site plan, conditional use permit, preliminary and final plat of Prince of Peace, second edition, and vacation of alley to the construct a addition to Prince of Peace Senior Apartments located at 301 Glen Street Southwest, 306, 316, 326 Franklin Street Southwest with favorable Planning Commission recommendation. And L is claims and appropriation contract payments, Register A. Anything anybody wants? Hold off.
Wanted E, H, and J, please.
What was that, Steve? I'm sorry, H and J?
And E also, just a, or, sorry, not E, I'm sorry, G. Didn't want you to think.
All right, and I'll pull E off.
I'll make a motion to approve the balance.
I'll second.
Motion by Chad, second by Mary to approve the balance. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, carried. E, we have the Hicuses here. Why don't you come up and give us a rundown on your requests?
Good evening. I'm Tess Hikus, and I am this year's Commodore for Water Carnival. Did you want me to go over each request here with you?
Yes.
Okay,
Put you under the gun here.
that's okay. It's long.
Well, we figured that you could like rifle right through it, so.
Okay, well, a majority of them are the yearly requests, that you guys approve every year. We do have a new event this year, and that is on Saturday, June 8th, called Party in the Park. So I guess my vision behind this was just kind of bringing back like an old-fashioned party in the park / kind of street dance type feel, something like that, but it's kind of all maintained within the park, but a family-friendly event. So we were asking for some noise ordinance exceptions for the music that we played in the band shell, looking to have like a, kind of a barbecue type of feel to it. We'll have some bounce houses and face painting for kids. Buffalo Wild Wings will be selling non-alcoholic and alcoholic beverages in the park, which we have applied for the liquor license as well as the liability insurance. So that is something we are looking forward to as a new event this year to kind of kick off Water Carnival. And otherwise, did you want me to go through each one and every one of them?
No, I think this is the new stuff. I think
Okay.
we all kind of figured out what's all going on from the.
Okay,
years
no, that's
past.
okay. I'm happy to go over anything you
just
want me
wanna
to,
know-
but this is just really the only difference this year is the new event in the
What's
park.
Chad in charge of, so we know whether.
He's on my finance committee. So he's out there getting money for
Money man.
us so we can put these things
For
on.
like the 84th time. or so.
So any questions I can try to answer for you?
Just fireworks 2 times?
Yes, we are going to have fireworks on Thursday night and on Sunday night, like we have the last 2 years. So we feel like a majority of the people love them, so we'll go with that.
Sounds wonderful. Looking forward to it.
Okay.
Always a fun time.
So
Yes.
this time you'll have music, kind of an event behind 101 Park Place one evening, right? Instead
So
of,
the
like,
8th, we'll have music in the park, along with other, like I said, family events. And then we will have music on Thursday night for the boat parade before the fireworks. Main Street is not doing a street dance this year, so they will not have music there. It fell on the same weekend as Winstock, and then the following weekend they have their Glencoe street dance. So that's where I think that Party in the Park too will maybe kind of fill that void a little bit, but allow the committee to kind of participate in that too. So, because it usually falls on things that we're already engaged in, so
Well, let's hope for good weather.
I hope so too.
Great.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'll make a motion to approve the request.
Second.
Motion by Chad, second by Dave to approve. Discussion, all in favor?
I-
Opposed, carried. Steve, G?
Gee, I guess, I think we've talked about this before, but just question the need for the public hearing when we're not bonding, we're not assessing, there's no requirement to have one. Why not just have it as a regular agenda item and be done with it?
We could do that. We arrived at the public hearing approach years ago. I think it's a good formality to do from a project delivery standpoint. I don't know
Why?
if Mark or Matt would have anything to weigh in on, but I don't think it's a bad habit, is what it boils down to.
I don't see the purpose, really. I mean, you could have it as an agenda item and still get the same information.
I think it's more treating projects in a consistent manner from the front end, and this informs the council, basically, that this is the estimated cost. We welcome the public to provide any input, and then we start the bid process.
There isn't a requirement. It's been a
It's been the practice.
practice of the council for, I don't know how long you guys have doing it, but to your point, Steve, there's not a requirement to do that. So,
You just see some of the other expenditures we make and we don't have a public hearing, so. and-
I do believe, and I vaguely recall from the past, and it's probably been a decade ago, but I think we did have a question from our auditor at one point in time, why we were doing public hearings for some projects and not others. And even though, and you're exactly right, Steve, that we are not utilizing 429 special assessments to fund this type of projects or similar water wastewater projects, I think we arrived at, and that probably predates Andy and maybe even Jeremy, honestly. So, yeah, it dates way back, yeah.
So for some consistency, then,
Yeah.
okay, just thought I'd
I
ask.
guess I would just add, if, it's a question Andy and I can ask, but if it's something that the council would, I guess, prefer to do away with, that's something we could easily look to implement in the future, so.
It is an auditor-related thing, a clarification.
Sure,
Yeah.
yeah, we can do that.
And I've always felt it's good public information. It just really kind of initiates a public, information process on the front end of delivering, sizable improvement projects, whether they're being funded with assessments or not.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Motion by Steve, second by Mary to approve resolution number 15038 and 15039. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, carried. H,
Yeah, just wondering what the need for the parking restrictions are, since I'm kind of familiar with that area there, so.
Yeah, this will be based on conversations between city staff, engineering staff, public works staff, and emergency services. 3M will utilize their Fair Avenue Southeast entrance during the Fifth Avenue project, not only for trucks, but also for employees. It does get to be, the entire phase of that first phase of the project between the bridge on the east end and Adams Street on the west end ends up being about 2 months. And I think based on a meeting, the second meeting, I was at the first meeting, I apologize, I wasn't at the second meeting, I believe Chief Hatton was, but based on conversations between emergency services and 3M staff, they felt they would be beneficial to have the parking restrictions. Obviously, 3M owns, as depicted in the drawing in your packet, owns the property on the east side of Monroe Street, and then they own, I believe, the southerly, one's a lot and one's a home, 586 and 590 respectively, on the south end of that block on the west side. And then, like is mentioned in the resolution, the yellow would be approached in a on an as-needed basis, based on input from emergency services and 3M staff. And that's going to depend on how that on-street parking gets utilized.
I can see during the construction that it would be, just because what you said, you know,
Yep.
it'll get busy with the entrance there, but you're also making some of this permanently no parking, and that's what I didn't understand. So why not just make those areas temporary during the project? Maybe have the nighttime exemption during the winter for snow removal, but I don't see, you know, it's not causing any hardship. I see it all the time.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, Chief Hatton, but I believe that was more so 3M's request, because like I said, they own that property. And honestly, if somebody allows us to restrict parking on street from a public works standpoint, we'll take them up any day of the week, you know? I don't think there's truly a need here for, you know, other businesses or property owners, you know, adjacent to those 3M properties. So I think it's more so the permanent natures with respect to their request.
I guess I don't see it, so I would rather just have it signed temporarily. I don't know what others feel. I know people park there during the day, so, but during.
Maybe that's why they desire the restriction, honestly,
Well.
might be the case.
So we have other people park in front of other properties, so, again, I just don't get it. So I would make a motion, just to have something to talk about, to provide temporary parking during, or temporary no parking during the construction project, and leave it at that for now. On the yellow and red sections that are identified.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
It's not?
Nope.
I'd make a motion to approve it as presented.
I'll second it. Motion by Chad, second by myself to approve as presented. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Roll call. Mary?
Aye.
Morning, Dave.
Dave? Steve?
Nay.
Chad?
Aye.
Aye. Alrighty. Jay?
Just, or Mark, maybe take that, just, there's more to it than,
Sure, especially in reference to our communication prior.
yeah.
Certainly, one of the things that I think Steve is talking about is, as Andy had presented this item at the last council meeting, it was presented that after we had made all the required lease payments under the lease agreement, that the equipment would be ours to own, and that is the case. I did not mention that in my board action form to you, which was included in the packet for this meeting, but upon the payments that we're going to be making for the 7 years duration, that equipment will be ours.
So this new agreement talks about that. I guess I started asking Mark a question over the weekend, just, we had talked about purchasing it, and then
Yep.
in
So
that
basically,
action form, it was lease.
right.
and-
Yep. So basically, it's, I guess you want to call it a lease to own or rent to own agreement. And then, as I mentioned, after we make the 7 years of payments, it will be our equipment.
Why do they choose to do it a lease to own instead of just a straight up, like, purchase? Yeah.
Well, probably the biggest benefit is that you get to pay for it over time.
Sure, but instead of,
Yeah, it was
That's
just the 2.9% interest, and I think Andy, right, it was just a way to save some cash, right?
Right.
And we should address the lease to purchase.
Yeah, essentially, it's a loan like you would have with your own car loan. It's the same, except with this, the bank is getting tax exempt proceeds from the city, which is a benefit to them.
Sure.
So, yeah, technically, it's what you think it is. It's a loan.
Okay. I'd make a motion to approve it then.
I'll second.
Motion by Chad, second by Mary to approve. Any other discussion?
So the new document has some of that other language spelled out, like?
It does, specifically in section number 10, it talks about the fact that upon the final payment, the title to the equipment's going to be transferred to the city. It's in section 22 and 23 as well, but additional language has been added just to emphasize the fact that, hey, when we make the final payment, the equipment is ours.
Perfect. Thanks.
You bet.
Call the motion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. All right, approval of consent agenda number 2, claims appropriation, contract payments, register B. I have a check on there for putting a sight light and a door at the fire station, so I'll abstain from voting.
I'll make a motion to approve it.
Second.
I know. Motion by Chad, second by Steve to approve, with me abstaining. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. We do not have a public hearing. So, we have the Hutchinson Police Department 2018 year-end report. Good evening, Chief Hatton.
And just to know, this will be his last report to the Hutchinson City Council, so.
Well, good evening. I was focused on what Melissa was telling me, so I didn't start off by goofing this up, but, okay, so yes, we are presenting the Police Department's annual report. And first off, as we show every year, this is just a broad overview of the history with the police department in regards to population, the number of sworn officers, officers on patrol, and the breakdown throughout the department. And so the total staffing numbers, and then at the very end on the right, the total calls for services as they've grown over the years. And you can see the button at the bottom in red is what we operated with in 2018. So our accomplishments, obviously, to work with other city departments in the community to accomplish the end statements, that is always first and foremost on our minds, and it was and continues to be our mission as we provide police services to this community. The police and fire training grounds need some significant improvements, and we've begun those, and the goal of that project was to improve the safety and the quality of the training for the participants on the grounds by adding a school bus, which was actually donated by Vision of Hutchinson Bus Line, so that was very kind of their donation. But in addition to the training grounds, we repainted the shoot house, and that project was completed in 2018 with the money that's currently budgeted to make those improvements on an annual basis. And those improvements will continue in the years to come. Continue to develop and implement the body-worn camera program that is fully operational. In fact, we'll talk about it here a little bit later, but we actually just went through our first state-required audit of that system. But part of that, we've also added this year what is called Axon Capture, which allows our officers to utilize phones, cell phones basically, to capture photos, take statements, and automatically download that into the system so that the reports, the audios that are recorded, any statements that are recorded, any photos are taken, are all within one easy case file, I'll call it, that we can utilize to prepare for any criminal cases and forward on to the attorneys for charges. So it really is a very efficient, effective program that we have with this Axon, both in the body-worn cameras, the car cameras, and now in Axon Capture. Hutchinson Police Department Policy Manual, the entire department policy manual was reviewed and updated to ensure that the policies comply with state statutes, post-mandated standards, and the needs of our own very community. And so that was recently done, which is, timing is awesome in regards to as a new police chief takes over for the police department, that they will begin operations with a fully updated policy manual for the police department.
Is that something the police commission helped with?
Yes, the police commission helped to review that, correct. And then obviously the complete a sergeant's promotional process to fill the current vacancy, and also a lieutenant's position to fill that current vacancy. So, that was, the things that we did was fulfill the sergeant's test, which is Sergeant Nordstrom. And the benefit to that is we also still currently have that active list as we go through and start the promotional process here in the next week or so. All right, so 2018 calls for service. As you can see, in 2018, we had an increase in regards to that. So over 20,000 calls for service. It's an increase that happens, as you can see, over the last 4 or 5 years. In fact, it's been about a 9% increase over the last each of the last 4 years. And then the 14.5 is what actually is considered population, what we work off of.
Do you see the largest increase is, you have 1,100 more this year? Is there one area, or is it spread around?
We'll see some of those things that increase, because some things have decreased, some major crimes, which is a good thing, but a number of things have increased in regards to some misdemeanors or gross misdemeanors, along with what you'll see is overall police activity. So here's this trend that's not necessarily really good. The trend is an increase in the number of arrests on an annual basis. And as you can see, 481 last year. Arrests are up about 13% from last year, and it's at its highest level in the past 5 years. Here's the good news. Part 1 crimes are down and are trending down, and that's the lowest over the past 6 years. And just to remind everybody or refresh your memories, Part 1 crimes deal with homicides, rapes, robbery, aggravated assault, burglaries, arson. So that's the good news. Here's where some of that can answer your question, Steve, in regards to the number of calls. There was an increase in regards to citations and warnings, and so obviously those relate as calls. So the activity that the officers self-generate are out there proactively enforcing the community is both good for traffic safety in regards to educating and reminding the public to drive safely, but it is my belief that it also has a direct effect on crime in general in regards to people in the community knowing and seeing and observing those officers actively patrolling and enforcing laws in our city. Here's the nuisance properties. You can see that we've been trending down in regards to the number of nuisance properties that we have, which is a good thing. but don't get me wrong, we still have a number of nuisance properties. And I'll be real honest with you, it is a very delicate balance in regards to trying to gain cooperation with residents to comply with the ordinance and dealing with those folks who are in financial situations that don't allow compliance, so that we don't, just by issuing citations, actually make the problem worse with those residents, because if they can't afford to make the improvements necessary on their house, a fine isn't going to help that situation, it's only going to compound it. So we work very hard and we're very patient with folks as we try to make improvements and try to make connections with residents into resources and other avenues that they can take to try to bring their properties into compliance.
You know, and I'll just add a little bit to Dan's point on the nuisance. I think a lot of people don't realize and Mark can attest this, the process that has to be involved when you're dealing with some of these complaints. We have to remember it's private property, and obviously there's private property rights. And so we may have a complaint that comes into us on a nuisance, and it might even be a dilapidated building. At the end of the day, Mark has to get a court order for us to go in and take care of things if there's not cooperation from the property owner. And we've seen some of those cases take 3 years. So when somebody calls and says, hey, we got a problem, and then 6 weeks later they're upset with us because we haven't done anything, well, we may be going through the process that takes quite a long time to address it. And so that plays in. Hopefully you have, you know, people that are willing to help out. And a lot of times you run into situations where there's maybe a death in the family, and that's part of what takes some time too, because you have to find the correct property owner and all those things that play into it. And so I just think sometimes the public needs to realize that there has to be a little bit of patience when it comes to some of these things, because if you don't have a cooperative party, it may take some time to address those nuisances.
About things that just clutter in general. Again, that's not really a financial hardship, it's just almost, in a way, almost like hoarding, you know?
Right.
Seems like.
And in
So-
some cases, it truly is hoarding situations, and in some cases, it's people who have let it go for a number of reasons and take active steps once we contact them to start to resolve the problem. And then there are those members that will bring it into compliance and then allow it to fall outside of that compliance. And, you know, we don't have the resources necessarily to stay on top of every property to make sure they're in compliance, but it gets very frustrating for the neighbors too. That,
Exactly.
you know, law enforcement shows up, a week later the place is in compliance, 2 weeks later the place is back outside of compliance, and that's very frustrating for neighbors, and I truly understand that. Okay? Hospital security, again, calls for service continue to rise at Hutchinson Health with about a 29% increase over last year. Part of that is an increase in number of calls, and to be honest with you, I think a small percentage of that is just a better job of our hospital security staff to report and document all the things that they do for the hospital on a regular basis. So that program, from I believe the hospital's point of view and certainly from our point of view, is a tremendous benefit not only to the police department but to the community in general to have those officers out there at that hospital for added security. Response time last year took a small dip, which is a good sign. That's always positive. We want to watch that and pay attention to that. What makes it even a little more significant is the fact with the total number of increased calls for service that number still took a little bit of a dip in regards to the amount of time to respond to true emergencies. And that is the part we measure, not the average call. If somebody reports a bicycle stolen, this is true emergency. So if somebody calls us on a medical and they're having a heart attack, whatever the case may be, that's where we go looking to find out how long is it truly taking us to respond to somebody's emergency.
Dan, is there a goal that you have for your department or a standard that you try to keep
There
within?
really, there really isn't. You can't compare from city to city depending on the size of the city and the traffic, and all of those factors have a tremendous change. For us, I'm just looking departmentally in regards to how we have done historically. Is it getting better? Is it getting a lot worse? And I don't believe that you're going to see it get much better than this 3 minutes to respond. It's just not practical. And the other aspect is, to be honest with you, I don't want my staff driving any faster than they do right now, So our responses are quick, but they are always to be under control. And our officers, the videos that are recorded, we monitor those. We watch to make sure that our officers are staying within that policy of how they're responding to calls, because, again, if we could get there 30 seconds faster, but one squad car crashes, now we've created a whole nother emergency that has to be dealt with. These are a couple of things that always concern me. So fortunately, we had a decrease in the number of vulnerable adults, but obviously, the number of vulnerable adult cases that we have to, and when I refer to intakes, that's a concern or a complaint that comes into the police department that we have to respond to. And these can come from a number of sources. They can come from private citizens, they can come from public health through the county, they can come from hospitals, they can come from a number of different sources, and we are obligated to work with social services to investigate to see if there's any validity to these concerns. And so we had a decrease last year, which is good, but we still had 107. School liaison officer, obviously we're all well aware for years we have an officer up at the high school and the middle school. And there is a decrease in the number of calls there over the years, but as you can see, that number still continues to trend upward in regards to the needs to have that officer in the schools. And that's a partnership that I truly know that the school and the police department value, and I truly believe the citizens and the students and their families truly value this program and what it brings to the overall education and or the safety of those students. So. With child protection intakes, again, intakes refer to investigations, concerns, or complaints come into our department via a number of different avenues. Last year we had 289, which is a decrease, and that is good that there is a decrease in the number of them, but obviously that's still a lot of cases. And it resulted in 36 children being removed from their homes. And that's down from last year, but it's still a very significant number. And that's not necessarily that they're removed permanently. That is not law enforcement's decision. But they are removed temporarily. Child Protective Services and the courts decide what happens from there. But basically, 36 children were removed for emergency holds for what were deemed as dangerous situations. Southwest Metro Drug Task Force, I ask you, please don't be alarmed by that number when you look at McLeod County. It simply was a result of exceptional work by the investigating officer assigned from Hutchinson and the investigating deputy assigned from McLeod County. It was just plain hard work that got all this accomplished. And those numbers will ebb and flow as experienced investigators rotate out and new investigators come into that position. So it doesn't mean that the drugs are any worse or any better in McLeod County or the city of Hutchinson. It just means that we have some people who are very aggressive in regards to their investigations and have done an exceptional job. So some people may look at that and go, well, that's really bad for McLeod County. I look at that and say that's very good. That's exactly what we want to be doing, is trying to enforce those laws to the best of our ability.
Say, Dan, when you get into Hennepin County and Dakota County, aren't there other agencies too that are doing some of this outside of just the Southwest Metro Drug Task Force?
Well, there's like 11 or 12 task force across the state, obviously. So yeah, there are task forces all over that are doing this very thing.
So for Hutchinson in particular, you have McLeod County, is that just because the access, you go out of town? Is just
Well, yeah,
as
so with this task force, they don't recognize individual, the record keeping of the data,
Restrictions.
that they don't, individual cities, they're talking about specific counties. So, you know, for example, we currently have did have in 18, had two McLeod County enforcements. One happened to come from the city of Hutchinson, one came from the sheriff's office.
So what is Hutchinson's situation?
Well, it's no better or no worse. You're going to look at our numbers, and I don't have the specifics for the city of Hutchinson, but you're going to look at our numbers, and they're going to be higher than some cities or even a lot of cities our size. But again, you can't just look at that number and go, we have a larger problem. You have to take a deeper dive and go, are those other communities as actively trying to enforce those laws and make a difference as the city of Hutchinson is? So you have to dig deeper, and I've always been a firm believer, you cannot just look at those raw numbers and go, that city has a problem or this city doesn't have a problem. Let's face it, ladies and gentlemen, the drug issue is not only all over the state of Minnesota, but it is all over the United States. And those drugs that come into McLeod County are traced from the West Coast, they're traced from Mexico, and there are just trails all the way up and through here, and that's just the realities of how it is.
So have you ever looked at taking that deep dive and compared to some of the other communities?
We have not, you know, we just look at what we do here with the city of Hutchinson in regards to how we enforce it, and obviously where we do take deep dives is looking at other task forces in regards to what are they doing and are they being effective. And to be honest with you, our numbers compare greatly with the top or the most proactive task forces in the state.
This kind of acts like a deterrent from, if I was doing the, bringing drugs in, I'd look at that and say, well, I think I'll go down to Dakota because they're not as hot on the trail.
Yeah, but, and it would be nice if that were to happen, Gary, but the
Yeah.
realities are,
Right.
is these guys don't care about, they don't care about jurisdictions, they don't care about counties, which is why task forces like this continue to work, for the plain simple reason that we're not worried if it's a drug deal that's just inside the city limits, or if it's outside in McLeod County, in Acoma Township, or wherever the case may be. We're trying to investigate and enforce that, and that is truly the most effective way. And so that's why, as we continue to work with McLeod County, hopefully our numbers will continue to be this high and perform that well. Okay, body cameras. Last year was our first full year from calendar year. Number of videos uploaded, just over 21,000. Just over 4,000 hours of video recording. And for those of you who are tech savvy or computer knowledgeable, over 8,000 gigabytes of video. So one of the things that we'll start to do is create this simple graph, if you will, to see what the numbers are as we move forward into the coming years in regards to how many videos and how many hours and all of that. So we start to have a measuring stick, if you will, of how the program's doing. Are we are we still recording everything that we need to? Are the officers still complying with the policy and with state law, so that we make sure that we stay compliant with what we need to do with this program? And we just completed the audit, and I'll refer to it as a successful completion. There were no violations. In regards to that piece, there are some things or suggestions that should be tweaked, and we'll take a look at those pieces, and the final report should be with us in writing in a couple of weeks.
What is the
So-
go
Yeah.
ahead.
I was just going to ask, so the program's been in effect now for 1 year.
Well, it's been actually in effect since like April of 2017, but this
But
was
this is
the
the
first
first-
full year of numbers that we could collect.
Right. So are your officers all comfortable with it now?
Yes.
You know?
Yeah, they not only are comfortable with it, I would say if not all, the majority of them actually like it, because they have all seen, if they haven't been directly involved, they've certainly heard about an officer that has received a complaint, only to, when we look at the video, truly see that the officer was well within policy, treated somebody with respect and professionalism, that there was no validity to that complaint. And so those officers are truly seeing the value, along with prosecution, the success that we're having with prosecution, and all of those other factors that come into play here. So overall, it's a well-received program.
So what is the policy as far as when they turn it on?
They turn it on when they get a call, is what they are supposed to do. So you will see officers, the first part of the clip will be the officer, which can get a little nauseating, because the cameras are on their chest and they're in the car, and you just get to see a glimpse of what's happening through the windshield, and it can get a little nauseating. But the good part is by the time they get there, the cameras are fully activated, the audio is ready to go, and they capture that piece. They do have the ability to mute that camera. So if they want at the scene and they want to talk to their supervisor, they do have the ability to mute that camera so that they can have that conversation in private in regards to, whatever's happening with that case. We try to limit that, but they do have that right and that ability under the guidelines to have that conversation with their supervisor as they try to resolve what a situation is. Okay? 2019 goals are pretty clear. Obviously, we need a new police chief. That's been completed. The complete a lieutenant's promotional process, that'll be completed this week. We need to select and promote a sergeant from the current Police Commission certified list. That'll be completed next week also. And we need to complete a hiring process to fill the vacancies, and that's going to be coming up in the coming weeks. And we need a hospital security officer hiring process, and that'll be coming up following that. We'll be making those positions available or open up to advertisement here shortly. But that's a lot going on at the police department, but we're well ahead of the game thanks to you and thanks to Matt for allowing us to be that proactive in regards to getting these people in place and the new command staff in place this quickly. And then obviously some goals for the facilities are to continue to improve the police and fire training facility and to continue to work on a new police department, moving into the future. And that is it. Questions?
Good job.
So where are we with the lieutenant, and I guess that's the next in line,
Yeah,
right?
we have-
Position.
Some interviews on Friday or Monday. So-
Yeah, the process starts on Thursday, some interviews on Friday, and then
Yeah.
individuals should be selected or named on Monday.
All right, good deal.
So
Okay.
Chief Hatton, I just had a request from one of our people out in the street. ask about bicycle and what's the rules for the road and stuff for bicycles?
Bicycles on the road, as Chad well knows, need to follow the rules of the road. If they're acting as a vehicle, and this is a thumb sketch overview, but if they're acting as a vehicle or operating in those lanes, then they need to obey those rules. So if they come to a stop sign, they need to come to a stop at an intersection. So they need to follow those bike rules. But I encourage anybody who bikes to read up on those laws. There's a number of different avenues that they can gain those laws and review that. Not necessarily a bad refresher, even for some of the most skilled bicyclists in our community.
You
Thank
talk
you.
about warnings and stuff, maybe, and on the one service calls, you've got failure to yield to pedestrians, and we've had a few of those in the
Yep.
past, but not recently. But there could be something about warning to bicyclists too.
Absolutely, yeah. Our folks are encouraged to interact with those bicyclists too, not just to see, as they see those violations and to just not address it. They are encouraged to enforce and make contact with bicyclists as they see those kinds of violations, because ultimately, if something goes wrong, if somebody makes a mistake and there's a collision, the bicyclist is the individual who's likely to pay the biggest price.
Anything else for Chief Hatton, since this is the last time? I thought maybe there'd be some music or something.
No,
Confetti.
silence as it should be, yeah. Yeah, it's really not about what's done, it's it's the next page. So, and the police department is set up for the future very well, so.
Well, thank you for all you did for the community of Hutchinson, Dan.
When is your last day again?
May 3rd, Friday, May 3rd.
Maybe.
What?
Maybe.
Maybe if I can make it. Yeah,
I'm trying to figure out if I want to leave them stick around then.
Well, no, in all honesty, and I'll step away, but in all honesty, it has truly been an honor and a privilege to be the police chief for the city of Hutchinson, which is, my hometown, and it's really been a dream, to say the least. So I've been fortunate. So thanks to the current council, previous council members, city administrator. It's been a truly fabulous 15 years, and I got to say this without hesitation or reservation. It's the men and women who work in that police department that make this thing go. It's not me standing up here every once in a while and addressing council. It's the men and women who make it go, and I've worked with and currently work with some very extraordinary people in their police department. So I've been very fortunate, so thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Well,
Thanks,
thank
Dan.
you. I think we, as the citizens, and I'm speaking for this group, I'm certain I'm speaking for every citizen in Hutchinson, you have done our city proud. You have stood before us and made us understand things. People can come to our police department. Our city feels safe. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you for staying in Hutchinson.
Thank you very much for
For
that,
coming
Mary. I
home.
appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan. Review of Truck Highway 15 Main Street project items.
Kent.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Get things going here. In front of you is a variety of handouts, information on the Highway 15 Main Street front. We'll be talking primarily about downtown, the reconstruction portion of the project. We'll touch on the south end, the resurfacing, ADA and improvements portion a little bit. We're at the, here in the beginning. All right, first and foremost, Gene East with MnDOT, project manager, is with us again this evening. Thanks for Gene for being here. MnDOT did provide us a little bit of information on the schedule and construction sequencing front. We've moved away from the staging language and we're calling it sequencing. You might have noticed on the drawings we'll get into here shortly. Yeah, and with that, I'm going to move pretty quickly. You know, kind of getting sick and tired of Highway 15 Main Street, but no, we're getting there. And yeah, there's been a lot of work put into where we're at in the last few months. MnDOT's consultant, SEH, has done a fine job. Obviously, the city has been participating and providing input along the way. Our utility plans, our sanitary sewer water plans are very far along in the process. So I think everybody in general is pleased where everybody else is at this point in the project design development front. And this first page of this information gets into that. The first item, 90% plans and bid documents, that is complete. The 90% submittal happened just a few weeks ago. So the consultant has gathered information, you know, from their design people, from city staff, our plans. Our utility plans have been incorporated into those documents along with our draft specifications. That's been passed on to MnDOT, and MnDOT will now start their formal review of the 90% plan submittal. Next item, looking forward a little bit from a schedule standpoint, we're going to start talking a lot about agreements and permits between MnDOT and the city of Hutchinson. There's a formal cooperative agreement. I believe that's still the title of it. It'll have to be executed between the city and the state. Very similar to what we did on Highway 7 and a little bit of Highway 15 about 12 years ago. Next item, utility owners meeting number 2. There's obviously a lot of coordination with respect to the small utilities, electric, gas, TV, cable, fiber optics lines. So we'll be touching base, or MnDOT and the consultant will be touching base with those utility providers again in the near future. And then looking forward a little bit more, downtown businesses, we're planning on having a meeting or a group of meetings with them. And this is really coordinated between MnDOT, SEH, and the Chamber of Commerce. Mary Hodson's led that charge and has done a great job. So we'll be touching base with property owners, business owners here in a couple of weeks or so. And then really what's going to be happening primarily between MnDOT public relations engagement staff and the chamber, Mary and crew, they'll start doing some outreach effort going into the summer months on a variety of fronts there. And then looking towards July, middle of July or so, the 100% plan and bid documents need to be submitted. Like I said, I think everybody's pretty well situated. We have a few loose ends to clean up, and we'll touch on a few of those things here shortly. But July 19th will be here in a hurry, and then looking forward the stated bid letting date of November 22nd, which has been the date from the very beginning, starting 2 years ago, still holds, with construction starting in spring 2020. So I don't know if there's any questions schedule-wise. If not, gets into a little bit more just the general bar chart schedule that you've seen before. You know, we're well into the purple bar there. They're going down on the list, final design, like I just mentioned. And yeah, fall is fast approaching, and I believe things are going well, and we don't foresee any issues with the letting date. And then construction, the orange is obviously slated for 2020. And we'll talk a little bit more about this shortly when we get into the construction sequencing, but we still foresee, you know, the construction happening in one season. It's a lot of work to be done in one construction season. All of the restoration and landscaping work might not be accomplished, and weather and other things will determine that, but I think we're confident that the project can be substantially completed in one construction season. Then project goals, benefits, summary of the work. This is really information that's been conveyed from the very beginning. This is a little bit different. You might have noted this. I know we talked about this at the Citizen Advisory Group meeting a few weeks ago. And this, I think this is a good change, and it's come about based on some conversations that MnDOT staff has been having, and then ultimately they had to consult with the McLeod County Highway Department. And basically what's being arrived at, obviously, is routing the detour, the formal truck through detour to the west side of town and utilizing 115. And that helps us stay away from a couple potential problematic intersections on the east side. 7 and 22 has a variety of traffic movements and higher volumes than 7 and 115. And also 115 corridor doesn't have another intersection or large intersection like 22 does with 115 there, which obviously also has a fairly large amount of traffic and a variety of movements. So I think this is a good approach. It's going to take people out to the west, obviously, a ways and back in. This is the through truck detour. Local business signage will still exist, and we're getting into the gory details of what that's going to consist of from a plan and bid document standpoint, but I think we're comfortable with where that's going from the city standpoint, and also the Citizen Advisory Group has been involved in those discussions along with the chamber. I don't know if there's any questions with respect to the detour. Wrong way. All right, construction sequencing plan, and there's been a lot of effort and thought and energy put into this, and I thank the consultant, I thank MnDOT especially. I think we've arrived at a good approach from the city's standpoint and also from a construction deliverable standpoint. There's a lot of work to be done, and I don't want to sell that short here, and that's MnDOT's primary concern when they set up a project and look to sequence the work, to stage the work. But I think we've arrived at a good middle ground here that allows that to happen, but also I think somewhat, well, not somewhat, but acknowledges the interests of our business community, our downtown business community, to hopefully make this as least a hardship as possible. So with that, and I won't get into a lot of detail here, please take this information, look at it, but this page pretty well sums it up if you look at the color drawing, and then obviously the following drawings just get into more detail with respect to the 4 stages. But simply stage 1 is the north end, 2nd Avenue Northwest, and it's making utility connections at that intersection. So Highway 15 will be shut down from the north end starting on day 1. The sewer and water will be tied in, and storm sewer, I believe. And then that intersection, 2nd Avenue Northwest and Highway 15, will be put back together. At the same time, we'll be installing a sanitary sewer pipe at Franklin and 2nd Avenue Southeast. Obviously, the other number 1 in orange there up on the drawing. And that'll allow us to accommodate a sanitary sewer bypass piping effort later on in the project. Once that's complete, you'll move on to stage 2, the pink there, which is in essence the first 2 blocks between 2nd Avenue Northwest through the Washington Avenue intersection. And then after that, the contractor will be able to move on to stage 3, Washington Avenue down to 2nd Avenue, through 2nd Avenue Southeast. And as stage 3 is going on, stage 2 will remain closed to traffic. I just want to make that clear. So there's a middle ground there, a transition that's happening there between those two stages. However, at the end of stage 3, the contractor will then bring in their concrete paving operation and pave, well, one I should have mentioned most likely will be temporary bituminous blacktop paving when they put that together on the front end. But after stage 3, the utility work in stage 3 is completed, the contractor can then come in and pave 1, 2, and 3, and then move their operations on to stage 4, albeit there's another transition happening here. And these are some of the fine details that'll have to be worked out with the contractor from an exact construction schedule standpoint, but the contractor's utility crew may be allowed to move on to stage 3 prior to the concrete paving being completed in its entirety on stages 1, 2, and 3. And most likely that would only be between 2nd Avenue and 3rd Avenue South. So what needs to really happen is you have all these different operations, but the two critical ones are the road building, specifically the concrete paving, and the deep utility work. And we need to transition from one to the next each phase, but you don't want their utility crews to go away from the job and have these large gaps of time in between the utility work is what becomes the concern. However, getting that concrete paving completed between 2nd Avenue North and through 2nd Avenue South really, I think, protects us, everybody on the back end. If weather doesn't cooperate come fall, you're not waiting for that concrete paving operation to show up in its entirety late in the fall. So the wheels fall off weather-wise, at least we have, the north end, the north 4 blocks of the project paved, and primarily, or probably most importantly, 2nd Avenue South is paved from an emergency services corridor standpoint. Chief Schuman and I have had a lot of conversations about 2nd Avenue South and how critical a route that is to them. And with that, yeah, 4 is really the last phase, and we go through 5th Avenue. More than likely, we'll work with the contractor to avoid shutting down 5th Avenue on the north, on the very, beginning of the job when the north end of stage 4, sequence 4 is being worked on. Because once we shut down 5th, it's really an ugly detour across on 6th Avenue, through Hassan, over to Jefferson, jogs back up over to Adams, and that's really turns into a very ugly detour for northbound traffic there. There's really no good alternatives, unfortunately, on that side of Highway 15. I know this is a lot to chew on, and Gene can attest, it took us a while to get here, but I don't know if you have anything to add, Gene, on the sequencing?
The only thing I would want to add is this sequencing process that Kent described here is a little bit complex. There will be another opportunity. You'll note in the schedule that it was offered on the front sheet, the week of May 13th. 14th and 16th, I'll be working with Mary Hodson, and we're gonna spend extra time talking about this specifically. So if you'd like another opportunity to get a little deeper look, some of the intricacies, please feel free to participate. We'll be getting the word out about that further, deeper look at that sequencing. We'd be more than happy to have you participate and ask those questions one-on-one as one time permits, much better. The only last thing I would offer is that our project, most importantly, what I wanted to make sure we hear today is that we're fulfilling the purpose and need, the scope of the project. We're on schedule and we're on budget. We're good. We're looking golden. That's my main message today.
Thanks, Gene. Yeah, I'll pass that on once those meeting dates are set. I believe it's going to be on the 3rd.
14th and 16th.
14th, 16th, yeah. Excuse me, Tuesday, Thursday. Yeah, like I mentioned, yeah, the remainder just gets into more detail, and it shows exactly where the closures are gonna be, the barricades. We wanna protect, these alley corridors, so it'll be barricaded, obviously, to the Main Street side of the alleys, to allow people to continue to utilize those alleys for parking, access to their businesses, service providers and such, emergency services. However, when you're getting into Washington Avenue per se here, you obviously can't let people get right up to the barricades there where the work is happening. And also the contractor's gonna need some room to stage materials and equipment and such. So this, during area 2 here, the area north of First Avenue South in Washington would also be closed. With that, I will move on here. Get into a little bit of streetscaping, just a quick refresher, and I know we've talked about this in the past, but nothing has changed from a sidewalk aesthetic standpoint. We're still looking at the colored walk. It won't be stamped like we currently have out there today. It will be the same coloring, but it will be a tool jointing. The colored band, if you look at the dimensioning close here, is 4 feet wide, so it's going to be wider than what's out there today, which does allow us not only to help address some ADA slope requirements that really necessitate this colored band getting wider, but it helps arrive at some even dimensioning. We'll end up with 2x2 panels that'll be actual tool joints in the colored walk, and then in the gray here, which is the white, we'll end up with 4x4 saw cut panels. And what'll happen is there'll be a foot here, give or take, left behind that last 4-foot panel. Basically, there is, on average, between back of curb and face of building, about 13 feet out there today. Planters. I believe it's been a while since we touched base on this front. We talked about this a fair amount at the Citizen Advisory Group. This is the planter we've arrived at. It has both the block feature and the arches feature that we looked at many months ago. The width of it is 4 foot 6 inches, 54 inches, and then the height is an even 24 inches. Yes, 2 feet, obviously, from bottom here, bottom of the legs to the top member. And we're comfortable. We've gone out there and we've looked at some window heights. We've started to have some discussions with respect to what would be planted in these. We feel that 2-foot height in conjunction with some moderate height, moderately tall plantings, should be all right. We're going to then start to look at locations, specific locations for these planters, and then engage some property owners and get their thoughts with respect to the locations we're looking at. Then, like I mentioned before, we're going to reach out, and I've really waited to bring this to council. We'll start to reach out to local fabricators with respect to manufacturing the metal framework for these planters. I believe we have enough detail that they can then utilize to do their CAD design work and figure out how that works with their fabrication systems. Is there any thoughts on planters? All right. Yeah, likewise, we spent a fair amount of time on the art pedestals. You may recall there will be 4 of these. And, yeah, this is still a dated drawing. I grabbed the wrong one, but please ignore the 5-foot dimension. That should be 4 foot in height. Otherwise, and Steve and the Public Arts Commission has been very involved as we've worked through this concept. I know there's a few things that we're still looking at, how the art work would be mounted on the top and exactly what sort of bolts and potentially what bolt pattern. I think we're fairly comfortable with the placard, how it's depicted, correct, Steve? Yeah. And this is all subject to change, but I think we're at a point here where we're far enough along in the design. We're just down to the gory details again, and I think we're getting there. I did hand out, I won't put it on the screen, but I thank Steve for it, but he put together a schedule with respect to the request for proposals process on the public arts pieces. So that's been conveyed to MnDOT. Between the city staff and MnDOT, I think we have a comfort level that the structural pillar installation is going to be included within the overall bid documents. And that'll go through MnDOT's formal plan and spec review process. I don't think we foresee any issues at this point. And then the public arts piece of it, once the Arts Commission determines what the art pieces are going to be, we'll then take that back to MnDOT and get that permitted through their public arts policy. So I think we have an idea where this needs to go. We need to get it vetted through MnDOT. I think there's a comfort level on both fronts, so we're on the right track.
And just so everybody knows, the Public Arts Commission actually sent out requests for qualifications to get the whole art piece process started, and so it's in progress.
All right, and the last piece of information, and this is still being developed, and Gene mentioned, the MnDOT meetings occurring the week of May 13th. And we've strategically positioned ourselves to administer a city, what we're calling utility and assessments meeting sometime thereafter. And this will be for downtown property owners specifically. We want to talk about sewer and water services, and we want to talk about project assessments, both the general assessment and the sewer and water service assessments. And we're looking at doing that on Thursday, May 30th. And what we'll probably do is wait until the week of the 13th or towards the end of that week and send out our notice for this meeting. So there's no confusion on property owners' behalf, to which meetings which, and and those dynamics. So we'll get this out about 2 weeks before the 30th. It's our typical project neighborhood meeting notice, and what I have there in red, I still have to draft, but I think it's going to be pretty. It's very project specific, with respect to the variety of sewer and water services and unique situations and the water services that are back in the alleys and how we're going to address that and allow people to make that connection or not make that connection to the new service. And we'll spell that out within this notice here. And then, as usual, we'll get into our normal project process. We'll have our neighborhood meeting, and like I mentioned here, we'll we might have more than one, and then MnDOT will be administering overarching community business project meetings also. Public hearing, and yeah, this is coming quicker than a person realizes, but obviously with the bid date targeted for November, we'll shoot to have our public hearing on the assessment front in August or September. And then sometime after that November 2019 bid opening, we'll have the assessment hearing, and then we'll do the formality of awarding the portion of the project that's being funded by the city. We'll have the city council do that.
Is there mention in the letter about, maybe I missed it when you went, well, maybe we're going to talk about it right here.
Yep. We always want to be as forthcoming as possible
Yeah.
with respect to assessments, and, you know, give people as much information on the front end. And, yeah, what we're looking at, and I might clean this up a little bit, but I think this makes sense. We have a general streetscaping assessment, looking back at, we've had 3 different projects now that have been led by different jurisdictions. Obviously, Highway 715 Bridge area, Adams and Washington, and then actually the roundabout years ago, North End Roundabout. We assessed some people, some adjacent property owners, a general assessment on that project. You know, all of them have been, the most recent one's been about a decade ago, 2010, Washington and Adams. I put a inflation factor on what we administered at that point in time for a general assessment rate. Brought that up to $60 a front foot, and then decreased it by $32 a front foot. Approximate numbers here. The assessment for the streetscaping project was $64 and some change, basically 15 years ago. So you could, if that $32 or 50% of that $64 and change assessment rate is based on the logic that those improvements are halfway through their life cycle. You know, I'm comfortable with the 30-year life cycle for that sidewalk work and street lighting work that occurred then. And this can change. You know, this is my attempt of, you know, applying some simple logic and arriving at a rate. And actually, I think it arrives at a fair rate in my mind. Even if you applied, or if you added the $28 to the $64 some years ago, you'd arrive at about a $92 a front foot assessment rate. And this is a full reconstruction project. Our stated full reconstruction rate is $80 a front foot. And you can, you know, you can almost make the argument that these property owners are seeing more benefit with the infrastructure that's being arrived at. So obviously this is subject to change. This is my initial thought here, you know, and there's plenty of moving parts and some assumptions here that could change. Water service assessment, did some math on some recent bid prices today, and we're going to basically classify water services in 2 different groupings, 1 to 2 inch diameter, $2,500 a service line, and 4 to 6 inch diameter, approximately $3,500 a service. Then all of our sewer services that we build will be 6 inch. They might have to be reduced down to a 4 inch to tie into the existing service, but that's a relatively simple rubber Fernco connection adapter that's utilized to achieve that. But at least there's a 6 inch in the ground for a property owner if they ever want to upsize their sanitary sewer service in the future. Yeah, so I don't know if there's any thoughts on the assessment front at this point. Yeah, please take it, take this information with you. If you have any thoughts, please let me know. You know, this is a work in progress, and, you know, City Council holds the keys to what we assess until the very end, when we, just prior to awarding the project, the council will be asked to approve the assessment roll. So, and there's been more than one occasion that we've revised assessments, later in the process. But I believe these are conservative rates and utility service amounts. They're on the high side, I believe, to begin with, or at least I hope so.
But as far as the assessments, again, like Highway 7, there was assessments on that, and
Yes.
oh, it's state highway.
Yep, different jurisdiction, obviously, well, Washington was the cities, but we assessed $45 a front foot on Adams, which is county road. And that's really what I did to arrive at the $60, is I took that $45 rate, applied an inflation factor of 3% over the last 10 years. That's how you get to the 60. Otherwise, yeah, pretty typical. Like I mentioned, we're trying to do this in one construction season, and yeah, people are always able to contact me, or we'll meet them at their place. And I think that's it. Unless council has any questions.
Two things on the assessment. We don't charge the inflation rate on other, we have our policy, but it doesn't always increase every year based on inflation.
No, our
So-
set rates.
Yeah. so-
Yeah, why I treated this a little bit differently is we don't have a set rate for what we call a general assessment for these are very unique
Sure.
situations.
Yeah.
I will say, our base rate on Washington and Adams was $45 a front foot. However, on Washington, and anybody can look this up, but we charge $45 a front foot for the general, but then during the project development, we arrived at an additional $18 a front foot streetscaping assessment. So those property owners were assessed $63 a front foot. Yeah, so, there's some variability. We could start higher. I didn't want to treat it in that manner, because you can also make the argument that that was a city street, that arrived at $63 a front foot in total, 45 plus 18. This isn't a city street, so that's why I just applied the $45 and put 3% on it for the last 10 years to get to 60.
The last thing I had was on the planters. We had talked at the citizens group.
Yep.
I was looking at something else when you talked about that, but there's the black insert for the planter segment, but we had talked maybe one other rendition that we saw had other inserts on the whole side there. Did you mention that, or is that still being looked at?
I think it's still being looked at, Steve,
Yeah.
honestly, and talking with Carl, the landscape architect, and, we touched on this many times at the citizen. I think until we have one fabricated and then can really understand what that insert is going to look like, or how that can be fabricated, I don't think, well, honestly, this is unique dimensioning here. So that insert will have to be fabricated, in a manner to match this dimensioning.
Well, or else this could be fabricated to hold that insert.
Yeah, no, I know, and that's chicken or the egg, yeah. But I think in talking to Carl, and I think I think we need to maybe arrive at the metal framework, and I think there's gonna be a little bit of trial and error here. We're gonna have to have somebody build one of these for us, and, have a discussion whether we pay them for that or not, or what the contribution is, and then we need to, basically, it's like ordering the block on the pillars. They're gonna provide the block, and then we're gonna bless it or not, or provide feedback and tweak it, and until we arrive at the makeup of this, I don't think we can get into the insert. And talking to Carl and other people, he seems to think that's the right approach.
There was one that we were looking at that was ready-made, but a little different, and this is nice, so, yes. See how it pans out?
Excuse me?
See how it pans out.
Yeah,
know-
no, I think this is-
hoping that this is cheaper was
Yeah,
part
these
of
are,
it, too.
these are going to be unique. I guess the last thing I should mention, and I don't have an electronic drawing of it, but. Hold on. And this ties into what you're just speaking of, Steve. And this really, what we're doing from a streetscaping, project delivery approach is, in the, talking to SEH, MnDOT, and then a meeting with Parks Department a week or so ago. We're gonna look to site the rectangular planters, and that's the metal, black metal framework we were just looking at. And then the round planters, which are the hollow circles on the drawing. You know, there's two of them with respect to the mid-block tall street lights. And then we have them kitty corner of each other at the intersection. And then the solid round circles are the trash receptacles. And then along the way, it shows existing benches, it shows new bench locations. I think we really need to dig into what benches are staying, which ones are going, where are new ones. But at the end of the day, I think the approach we're going to administer is the city will purchase all of this planter, bench, receptacle. You know, granted, we have benches, we have trash receptacles. I think the benches are in better shape than the trash receptacles that have been out there for 15 years and been dinged around a bit. But more than likely, we'll refurbish the benches, get them blasted and repainted. Trash receptacles, it sounds like we might be better off just throwing these away for the most part and purchasing new ones. And then round planters, we're going to utilize the existing bell-shaped concrete-looking design and determine whether we want to replace those also or just utilize what we have. But, you know, in the end, I think how this is going to work best from a project delivery standpoint, the city will just figure out what we need on this front. We'll refurbish it, we'll replace it, we'll buy new ones, and then we will install these towards the end of the project, is what it boils down to. And that ensures we get what we want and we don't have to. MnDOT has a lot of state requirements, state law, trunk highway requirements with respect to their project specifications and how you can specify different things within their documents. That gets a little clumsy when you're trying to call out, we want this specific trash receptacle. Well, you might not necessarily get that one in the end. So I think this will work out well. So what we're going to do is we're going to lay everything out. This is a drawing that's been started by city staff. We'll lay this out. We'll quantify it. We'll figure out what we're buying, how much it's going to cost, and then we will provide this information to MnDOT, get a blessing basically on the spacing, the location of these different features, and then incorporate them later in the project.
Signage still being looked at and the,
Wayfinding?
yeah.
Yes. Gene and I were actually talking before the meeting. MnDOT has a revised wayfinding signage approach, and Gene's provided that to me, and then I will look at that with respect to the planning study we did a few years ago. Anything else?
Thanks,
All right,
Ken.
thank you much.
Discussion on amending chapter 93 of the Hutchinson City Code pertaining to chickens.
Mayor and council, well, Mayor, you had asked that this item be placed on the agenda for discussion purposes. I know this is an item that at least staff gets approached on probably 2 or 3, if not more times a year from residents. I think the last time this was addressed at the council level was 2014. And it was prior to my time being here, but I guess I'll give it back to you.
missed it.
So,
Well, yeah, on Facebook, Michael Mossman kind of had this blurb out there of asking for people to sign a petition to to allow chickens in the city of Hutchinson. Was talking with Dave a little bit, I kind of did some legwork on it already. I kind of just said that I thought that if we did have an ordinance, that it should include that they would have to take a chicken 101 raising chickens. I know Melissa is our chicken expert, as so-called. So I guess, Dave, I know we discussed it, and I did approach John out at Runnings and got some direction from him. He gave me a name of a lady that would come out and give a chicken raising class. So I guess, Dave, you want to?
Yeah, the class, if I understood Mayor Gary right, is, and she was ready to jump right on it with both feet, and she wanted it about the day after that Gary talked to her, but it's an instructional type thing that would require some proof that they have been there, certificate of sorts, and when raising and the eggs, how to do all that type of stuff. So I'm thinking that was a good start. That gives us some direction as to what people do or do not want, to do. I talked to Michael a little bit earlier when I came in, and he's written up a great list of things that need to be done or should be done, and those will come up in discussion later. But the thing of it is he's done his homework. He has some petitions that have been signed by several hundred people, and so community-wise, I think typically we just need to open the subject back up, bring it to a scope of what it's really going to involve someone that wants to be involved with growing chickens or growing layers. I shouldn't say growing eggs, I suppose, but with laying hens and that type of thing. And typically, no roosters are allowed. And so I'm really interested in what Mike is trying to do, not only from the perspective of being able to raise birds, but in some cases, it's more therapeutic in some areas. So I think that's the thing that we need to look at and be well aware of. I've talked to several people in the community. Some are, yeah, maybe, and then some are definitely no, and then some are, it's kind of like this thing, if it ain't in my backyard, I don't care type attitude, but typically it looks like it's really positive from my perspective. So I think that we need to take a good, solid look at it, define it really, really well, and go from there. And I think those definitions will then let us know what we need to do or not do.
I know Mark did a lot of legwork on it last time. I suppose you have all that, yeah.
Well, we do have a lot of documentation, as Matt had mentioned. It's been brought up a couple of times, and for various reasons was never implemented. But one of the things that had been a consistent concern throughout all these years was basically twofold: is how are you going to enforce the various provisions of the ordinance, and how do you respect neighboring properties? And those were things that previous city councils could never overcome or come to a consensus on. And so as you go forward with your discussion, those are gonna be, in my mind, two of the biggest things you're going to need to consider when you're passing an ordinance.
And I totally agree with that. I have sat down with Mr. Mike Massman, and we had about an hour discussion on chickens, and I expressed my concerns. We talked about education, because I think that's a big part of a chicken ordinance, is the education. I also think, you know, people just don't understand all the ins and outs of raising chickens. I also think there's permitting for it, and maybe that permit has a higher price. So if you're going to be a good chicken caregiver, you pay to be a good chicken caregiver. I mean, there's a lot of things out there pertaining to chickens. We live in a city where the people are complaining about the turkeys, and now we want to have chickens in our yards. So I have
feel
some.
that that's a fair analogy, though. I don't,
Well,
the chickens will be contained. The reason people are mad about turkeys is because they're in their face.
yeah,
But
right, but if you're the neighbor, and Mike and I discussed this, I said, you know, if you want to raise chickens, I think that 80% of your neighbors should agree that you can have those chickens. I just don't think that you can just say, I'm gonna raise chickens. You know, and I'm not for the chickens that have those, I think they call them tractors, where they move them around, all around the yard. We live in Minnesota. You need a stationary chicken house and a run for your chickens. I just think there's a lot of things out there that we still need to put in place and discuss. I'm not totally against the chickens. If you're a good caregiver and you're a good neighbor, I wouldn't have a problem with it. In fact, Mike is my neighbor. He's across the street from me. I went, oh, you live right across the street. You know, but I look at him and I know he would be a good caretaker. I don't know that about someone else. So I think we as a council have to set some strict parameters.
Stringent rules, yes.
Right. Or it's not going to work. And Dan, if you think your policemen are having a hard time with turkeys, how would you like to include chickens?
I was thinking more to the nuisance properties is when we were talking about this, but
Right.
I really truly believe the way that Mike has got this laid out in his format, which we need to take a look at. I believe that in my own mind that there will not be a tremendous amount of people raising chickens because of the way the coops have to be built, the way the runs are done, the cleanup aspect of it, just totally the care of the bird itself. And unfortunately, we're limited probably to 6, if that's as many as there's going to be. It's not going to be a huge factor. I just don't believe that there's going to be, it's going to be a cost factor. Mike is willing to do that cost factor. I don't think 240 signatures or 300 signatures on a document is going to say we're going to have 300 chicken growers in Hutchinson by any means, because people are not going to go to that expense to have something in their backyards that truly give them the pleasure of raising and/or caring for and/or eating their eggs and/or whatever the case may be from that. So I see limitations as being very little in all actuality, or participation very little. So my take is yes, we're talking a very few number of people, but on the other hand, it's like caring for a dog. It's like caring for your cat. If you're a good steward of your animals and you clean up after them, people have no problem with that. I see the same thing with a bird from that perspective.
I know, when I went out and talked to John about this subject, I kind of told him that, he kind of hung his head right away when I said that the chicken thing's gonna come back. But then, when I talked to him and said that I thought that they would have to have a certificate from taking a class, and he kind of liked that part of it, because,
Permit.
and, yeah, a permit, to get the permit, you would have to have a certificate from taking a class. Because I know I know Mike, he's raised on a farm, I was raised, and, yeah, we know how to take care of chickens, but, I think there might be a lot of them out there that would think it's kind of neat to have chickens, but have no clue. So that's kind of why I wanted the educational piece put into it.
Is there any way that educational piece could be done with a or a pamphlet or a informational booklet of some kind? Because I don't think there's anything else that we require people to, in this vein, you know, outside of, you know, motor vehicle stuff, you have to take a class and then take a test, but we don't require classes for any other permit of any kind.
But you're not, well, I was going to say, you're not specifically caring for an animal that you typically have not cared for before?
Right, but that information could be covered in a informational pamphlet or a booklet of some kind where people could read it. And, you know, I know this lady's fired up to give the class now, but if she wants to quit, then we'll have to find somebody else to give the class, and we'll have to give the class multiple times a year. It just seems like a disaster to me.
Well, I think, you know, you're right, if you're gonna do it intermittently through a year, but I think you're probably looking at licensing one time a year, is what I would see. Either you're gonna decide to do it in 2019, or you're not gonna, or you're gonna wait till 2020, and then you permit for 2020. Is what I see, is the way I would look at it, not every month or every week, or, you know, whatever that case may
Because
be.
Runnings get the last shipment of chicks in, the end of May. That'll be the last time they get, you know.
Right, but they're not the only
Right.
vendor of baby chickens either. You know, you can
Yeah.
get baby chickens.
I would just want to make certain that they knew the ins and outs of raising chickens, our ordinance, you know. They also need to know that, you know, chickens need to be dusted. Chickens end up with lice and mites. Chickens also need to be vaccinated. I mean, they're just not something you're just going to go at Runnings and pick up that cute little chicken, put it in its pen, and it's going to be just fine. You know, it requires feeding, cleaning. There's a lot to raising chickens. No.
And then also, Mary, I don't agree with the proposal to like kind of gouge the chicken people, you know, to have it high. I think it should be in line with other things that we charge permits for. You know, to have a high fee just to discourage chicken use. I don't
So
know.
what would you say a fee would be, like $25 and you can raise
Mike,
chickens?
would you want to approach the
No,
deal?
Mike, you come up and talk.
What do other communities charge for, I mean, it's been a long time since we've looked at this, but like, what do other
Yeah.
communities charge for permits to raise chickens?
First, you better introduce yourself.
Michael Mossman, resident of Hutchinson on Jewel Road, neighbors with Mary. So first of all, thank you for those of you who've had time to meet with me. For those who haven't, I look forward to the opportunity. Something that I've thought a lot about, and not just come in and ask for chickens, but I've done homework. So far, I've talked to 26 other communities similar in size to Hutchinson, as well as about 10 that are significantly larger or smaller. And on average for a permit fee, the highest in the state is $100, and that's actually for 35 hens. The average is between 25 and 50, which I think would be fair to ask our residents.
And I would say that would fall in line with other things we charge for permits, you know, in general, you
Yeah.
know, but I don't know what you had in mind, Mary, but
I think, you know, I don't know, Mike, you and I talked, and I thought it should have been like $100, but I'm okay with $50. But, you know, there are certain things that they absolutely have to know.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, you're educated, you know chickens, you've raised chickens. You know, people who have not done that do not know the ins and outs of chicken raising.
Yeah, and like I shared with you and the other council members I talked to, my concern is the same as yours. I don't want uneducated individuals raising chickens. I don't want my property owners adjacent to me to be neglecting chickens, causing a nuisance, adding to the nuisance properties in town. But I think if we regulate it clearly, well-defined stipulations in an ordinance, and a way to follow up on that, I think we have less problems than we are anticipating.
and Mike, how many chickens do most communities allow?
It ranges significantly. The lowest I found within 50 miles is 40. The highest is 35 to 40. Or 4, sorry, the lowest is 4, not 4. The lowest is 4, the highest is
Pretty big
about 40.
operations.
Average for a community our size, like Fergus Falls, for example, is 6 to 12. And as you go up in quantity, the fee
Yeah.
adjusts as well.
And for me, 6 to 12 birds, that's too many. I wouldn't be comfortable with that.
I looked online too, and it's funny you say Fergus Falls because I saw where it's 4.
Yep, that's one of the lowest. Yep.
Well, and so I looked at some of the the regional centers. So New Ulm allows them, 4. Wilmer allows them, but only industrial ag areas, kind of like what we do now. Larger numbers, depending on acreage. Marshall does not, Fergus does,
Yep.
but they're 4. Alex doesn't, Bemidji doesn't, Brainerd does, 4. Austin does not, Albert Lee does, and their number is 5. 3 of those that do, I'm not quite sure on Albert Lee, but they require approval by all the adjoining property owners, not 80%. I mean, so you gotta talk to your neighbors and help lay their fears that you're gonna do this right.
And 100% is a fairly rare stipulation if you look at communities in Minnesota. For those that do have a stipulation that you have signatures from your neighbors, it's traditionally 80%, and the distance varies from 50 feet from your property line to up to 100. I think there were a few that had 200, but they were more spread out rural areas.
In your research, do any other communities require a class?
Not one,
Seen
no.
that.
But what did you think of that idea?
Like I said, my concern is the same as yours. If someone's uneducated, the question is, how do we educate? And so in a proposal that I put together and I sent out to the mayor earlier this week, if we're going to make that a stipulation, there has to be a sub-stipulation that states that if the city fails to put together and provide a course, that no longer exists. I don't think it's fair, to Chad's point, if the woman we've talked to right now agrees to do it and in 6 months changes her mind, do we just cease chicken permits for 2 years till we find a replacement? Or do we bypass that stipulation until we can put together another course?
Well, the lady that I talked to is actually an employee of Cargill.
Sure.
So I'm sure if she would go away, there'd be another salesperson that
Sure.
would take her place.
Yep.
So,
Do most of the other communities require any kind of a test or educational piece for their permits? Do any of the other communities?
There's 2 things that most communities require. Agreement from adjoining properties and a fine or a fee. So some require one, some require both, but in most communities, I'd almost say all, there's not a requirement for a certificate. There is a requirement that you present your signatures from adjoining properties along with your fee.
Matt, was it Eden Prairie you said that they suggest to have a class? Or what, I thought you said that was one of them.
They suggested having or they actually did a community survey. Right, I don't remember.
And I don't believe it resulted in a
It was
a stipulation.
2015, they did a survey of the community, and it was like 56 to 58% were supported something, and I think it was in 18 of when they finally adopted an ordinance of 17 or 18.
I don't remember the class, though.
I want to say there was something about,
They suggest that they.
yeah,
took one,
suggested
right?
some training or education or pamphlet or something like that, I think there was some suggestions that they educate themselves, and they provided some links on the application to where they can go to be educated on raising the.
And we got a great Parks and Rec program.
Well, and one of,
Yeah, adults.
one of the things that, this is the administrative side of me that you guys need to be thinking about is when you start talking about class requirements, who's doing that? Who's, are we paying that person? That becomes a fee, obviously. Is that being paid for by the attendants? And then when you talk about enforcement,
Right.
If we've talked about how we want to ensure that people are meeting the standards of the ordinance that we adopted.
Right. And if we
Just like,
say,
and, you know, my concern is just like most of our other nuisance ordinances, we don't have a nuisance control officer.
right,
Our police department does the best they can. Most of it is based off of complaint-based. A lot of neighbors don't like to do that because then they feel like they're calling the cops on their neighbors. And so those are all things that we're gonna have to take into account. I think looking at the Eden Prairie, it was the building official who's responsible for checking on
on the chickens?
chickens. Are we gonna have our building official be responsible for that? And
Well, their inspector actually went out and made sure that the coop and the run and all that
Setbacks.
applied by,
Right.
yep, the setbacks and all that. Met the requirements. That was part of the fee.
yeah,
Right.
you know, so all that plays into, are they things that we can do? Yes. But depending on what that demand is, may have an impact on us as a city as well.
So that all being said, I just feel we don't need to have the most expensive, restrictive chicken raising ordinance in the state of Minnesota. You know, I mean, if
Agreed.
nobody else is requiring most of this stuff, I don't feel that we should either, you know, until, I just don't think it's gonna be this mountain of a issue that everybody seems to be paranoid about, when I think 12 people probably apply for the permit and raise chickens at the end of the day.
Eden Prairie is a one-time fee, so
What was that fee on Eden Prairie?
$75.
Yeah. What I was just gonna note is that for our building permit folks, you know, our minimum fee is $50 to go out and look at a re-roof project. The
Yeah.
idea there is you're covering the cost of the staff and the overhead
Right.
and things like that. So to me, if you're going out and measuring setbacks and looking at the runs and make sure that they're all meeting requirements, you know, you're at least gonna be at a $50 minimum just to cover your basic
Which
staff costs.
$50 I'd be fine with, but you know, you're talking 100 or more, I think
Yeah.
that gets to be a little bit nuts.
And then, yeah, I would think that generally speaking, it'd be at least 75 just to cover your, you know, the administrative cost and your field cost.
And that would be a one-time, you think, too? I mean, unless they change something or,
Well, I think it depends on what the ordinance, what says, what the requirements are. If you're going out and measuring coops and distances and things, I mean, you're looking at least probably an hour's worth of time, if not probably
Right.
closer to two.
but that,
Michael, are most
That'll be
communities requiring, or do they, as part of the permit, have a city official check the coops and runs and make sure they're all legal within the ordinance, or?
Traditionally not. Traditionally, that is complaint-based until there's a need for an official to come out and inspect due to a complaint or a nuisance.
Like what percentage of the, what'd you say, 30, how many communities did you look at?
Just over 20.
Sure, so how many of those 20 required a preactive, or a
An inspection to
preemptive
get the permit.
inspection?
I don't believe I saw that in any. There's typically a stipulation that if there's a need or that the city reserves the right to conduct that, but I don't think there's a stipulation in any of them that states that prior to, you know, getting the permit, you need to have a plot layout.
Sure.
There are a couple cities that require that when you submit your permit, on the bottom, you draw out a lot layout and you have to measure it yourself, and then plot on that drawing, your own sketch, where you're gonna locate the coop
Sure.
and where you're gonna locate the run.
Sure. And how big of a coop and run, just for educational purposes,
Mm-hmm.
like, say you raise a dozen chickens, because I don't see us having more than a dozen, you know, but.
better not go that far.
Nah, I'm not going with a
But
dozen chickens.
for question's sake,
But for a question, say, how big of a coop does a dozen chickens require?
typical requirement just for the health of the animal is 2 square foot per bird in a coop.
Sure.
So in your situation of 12 birds, you'd be looking at approximately 4 foot by 6 foot. And that's not a 4 foot by 6 foot, 8 foot tall structure.
Yeah.
You know, it simply needs to house them at night, so it could be a 3 foot tall structure, 4 foot by 6 foot. And then for an exterior run, what they recommend is a minimum of 10 square feet per bird, so you'd be looking at 10 by 12.
Sure.
Yep.
Which is the same size as my son's sandbox, you know, I mean, it's
Right.
not that.
Yeah, it's
big.
not that big of a layout. And in a lot of cities, and what I had kind of just drafted here, it also states maximums. And that way you don't have somebody taking 12 chickens and giving them 400 square feet in their backyard, right? Because
Quite a coop.
you know it could happen, right? It's quite a coop. So there are maximum per bird stipulations that I drafted in as well.
That's good. 'Cause I've seen that too.
It's
and
important.
That was something.
And you and I talked about the coops that just move around and
Mobile tractors, yep.
those are not,
Yep, and again,
Good
with
things
your,
either.
with your input, one of the things I mentioned in the just the draft, general, my own draft, not a city draft, but it does state that it has to be a stationary coop.
Right.
If it is going to be a hard structure that has a foundation of any sort, you're applying for a separate permit. You're getting that permit granted from the city prior to building.
For
If
put
it's
the
just a-
footings in for. the-
Right,
I'm just-
yep, exactly. But if it's just a freestanding coop that you
Right.
build a run around, that's typically not a permitted structure.
Would you ever permanently mount a coop to the ground? Or would there
You
be any
could.
reason to?
I mean, if I were to have chickens on my property, I'd most likely, instead of a small coop, I'd get a small garden shed,
Sure,
and I would probably foundation it.
okay.
Yeah, seems like typically they have a concrete base unless they're elevated off the ground, right? So,
Not traditionally, a larger coop would in cities where there's, 12, 20 birds. If we were looking somewhere between 4 and 10, 4 and 12, you'd be looking more at elevating it off the ground and
That's
then
what I
just
said.
burying in chicken wire about 6 inches into the ground. You wouldn't need a cement base or footings.
Well, that's what I said, though.
Oh, I apologize.
Would be elevated or,
Yes, sir. Yep.
yeah, so.
Mayor and council, a couple things, obviously, the discussions here tonight, so whether, I suppose what staff would be looking for, if there's a desire for us to draft an ordinance. I know Steve talked about Eden Prairie had a survey, we're getting ready to do our national citizen survey again for the community this year, so that's something you could look at asking. Obviously, that's not gonna be something that you're gonna get back till this fall, so that's a time period thing. If you're looking to gauge, public interest on that. But essentially, that's what staff's looking for off of this discussion tonight, is what you're looking for.
It's my personal belief we should not burn one of the questions on the national survey on chickens. I think there's way bigger things we could worry about chickens, because I think we can settle this without the information from that survey. But that's my own personal opinion.
Well, we've had a petition, but, 300, 200.
It's a small sampling of the population,
people,
right?
They're all Mike's relatives.
I have a big family. Big family.
The other thing too, obviously, he's started a petition, there hasn't been one delivered
right.
to the city, and, some of our options are, they can petition a specific language for ordinance for you to consider, or the council can go ahead and move forward with drafting something, so just a couple things for you guys to think about and consider.
Well, I think we could do it like we do everything else and just blend a bunch of what other communities are doing and maybe have a workshop and invite Mike, because he's obviously done a ton of legwork. And if there's other chicken people I know, like Gary's neighbor was big into chickens for a while, maybe he'd be interested. But I don't think this has to be the big hoopla that it was in 2014, in my opinion.
Well, I think Mike's got a lot of information together. I think he could maybe just pass that on to Mark, and Mark could kind of
Did
blend
you
it
send
in.
that? You said you mentioned it.
I'm gonna
Send it
forward
to
that out.
Gary to send it to everybody.
Yep.
and-
I have a solid copy.
What's your contact? You have my contact. Business cards? I don't carry my business cards. So, be a bad idea.
The 58.
Thank you, Mike.
Yep, absolutely. Anything else?
So I guess what Matt's kind of looking for is that, do you think that we should pursue it, or?
I just want to state, I've heard from a couple people already that heard about this and said, and they hope we don't, that they've lived by them before, and there is odor, even though you're supposed to clean up. And even the hens, they might not crow, but when they're laying, they're clucking and, it can be kind of noisy. But, depending on how you look at it, there can still be issues. So that's where I think having the sign off definitely has to be a part of it.
Yep. And like most animals, I mean, compared to a cat that was brought up, typically doesn't produce foul odors until you neglect it. And I think a chicken coop is the same. For enough odor to emit that noxious odors would pass a property line, I mean, you're talking weeks of not cleaning. And to laying hens, that's one concern I've heard a few times is the noise that they make when they're laying. An odd fact, it's about 70 decibels. Barking dog is 90 to 110. So, it's noise, but 70 decibels is a room, person-to-person conversation.
50.
Yep.
50 is talk.
Yeah, so, Right,
Based
that
off of the conversation and the interest, like I said, there's obviously a process that needs to be followed by the council, but, I think staff will work on drafting an ordinance that, for the council to consider and then follow through those steps that are required of any type of ordinance.
okay,
All right,
thank you.
thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Discussion on sending a representative to the Transportation Alliance fly-in.
Mayor and council, this actually came up in conversation when we had our joint meeting with the county board, specifically in relation to Highway 212, and I know the county board had shared what they feel is a important matter to try to communicate with our federal legislatures, and they had suggested to the city council that it would be a benefit to send one of our representatives to that meeting. And so with that being said, I know the deadline's coming up to register. I think it's May 20th, just to gauge if there is some interest in sending someone. Then I'd probably look at having a formal action similar to what we do with our staff that travels out of state, would be in front of the council at the next council meeting.
I had talked to Joe Nagel again, and he had expressed, thought it would be a good idea. There's other elected officials that attend, but so it doesn't have to be me, I'm not saying that, but if somebody else would want to do it, I think it would be good to have somebody attend.
Well, you
Speak about Hutchinson and the
you
unique
expressed
part of
that.
it, yeah.
Oh.
So,
Well, personally, Steve, I think you're the one that's kind of been in the forefront of representing us on the 212 front, so
Right.
I would say that you should be the one to go.
And I concur with that. If that's your wish.
yeah, I would do it.
I mean, are
think
you
it's
willing to go?
Yeah, I am. It sounds like this year in particular with the grant hanging out there, everybody thought this was a good year to
Go.
have a higher presence there, so.
Like I say, we've got a policy when it comes to staff that, there needs to be council support to travel out of state. And so what we'll do, I'll work with Steve. We'll try to get some better prices. And then we'll have that probably on the next agenda for a formal action from the council. So,
Good.
All right, thank you. We don't have any unfinished business. New business, amending VFW Post 906 liquor license to include liquor consumption in an outside seating area.
The
Thank
attorney's
you.
taking it, so.
Mayor and council. I don't believe there's a representative here from the VFW tonight, but as contained in, yeah, I could.
Technical difficulties.
Well, hopefully that'll come up in just a moment. But as contained in your packet, the VFW has made a request for the city council to basically expand the area where it can serve alcoholic beverages the memo in the packet states that permission is required from the city council anytime there's an alteration in the area where alcohol is going to be served. So this was a diagram that was provided by the commander of the VFW, just a rough drawing depicting where that expanded area would be. And what's being proposed is that roughly a 16-foot by 46-foot area on the east side of the building be able to be utilized for the consumption of alcoholic beverages. As noted in the board action form, they're proposing to erect a fence around that area to, I guess, better mark out the area where alcohol would be consumed. And as noted in the board action form, Hutchinson Police Services has no objection to the request. They are following the procedure that we prescribed for license holders to use, and they want to change the area that they're serving alcohol. So unless there's some concerns from the council, or if there's anyone else here at the meeting, staff would be recommending approval of the request.
So they're staying off the city sidewalk, and it sounded like in the letter it'll have a fence or something?
Correct, yep, they're proposing to delineate that area by the construction of a fence. And I'm assuming that they will be obtaining the appropriate specifications and the permits from the building department here at City Hall.
A problem with it? They're aware that they can't have service out there if they're going to be allowing smoking?
Right, if they aren't aware of that, we will be communicating that fact to them.
Yeah.
So, right, under our city ordinance, there cannot be any employees that are serving alcohol there that might be subjected to cigarette smoke.
Okay.
I don't have an issue with it.
It's a nice addition.
Yes.
One quick comment with respect to well, it's actually a trail facility there. You know, it ends up being kind of a mass of concrete there due to the roadway being concrete, their parking lot, and then the trail in between being concrete surfacing. The fence should be 2 feet back of the trail edge, which is theoretically the right-of-way line to meet clearance requirements.
That's a good point.
I'm not sure how that fits with, I think that's denoting a 16-foot width on the top of the page. there.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it's 11 and a half feet on the bottom portion, but that's only because the building is a different dimension.
Yeah, that corner there.
So we should just make sure it's out of the right of way plus.
Yeah, I would make just a stipulation that the fencing is minimum of 2 feet back of the right-of-way, from the right-of-way property line. Which is in essence the back edge of the trail facility.
Which are you saying that he needs it surveyed? Or are you confident where
They might
it's
need a
at?
survey, yeah. And that would be their responsibility.
I think if the council were to consider approving it, I would just do it on the condition that it meets, you know, all zoning setbacks and, you know, setbacks from the right-of-way. So,
Actually, our trail ordinance does talk about that too, having any fencing or,
Yeah, I don't know if we'd note that dimension. That's more of a state aid. MnDOT bicycle trail design parameter that we're held to when we design a trail facility within public right-of-way.
From a zoning perspective, I believe that's zone C3, and structures are able to be built right up to the property line. So I don't know how that merges with the trail piece, but I guess that's something we can look into. Because technically, the buildings to be right up to the property line, similar to what they are downtown.
So how many stipulations do we have so far?
So, I think, right,
It's got to be the zoning ordinance.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I make note of that because we have a trail facility that's the city's within a county right-of-way. that went through state aid approval, built it back in 2010.
Sure.
We should strive to meet that standard,
That makes sense.
because it does get to be a sea of concrete out there.
So you're saying 2 feet, I was confused when you said the back edge of the trail facility
Is in essence at the right of way.
is at the right of way, yeah.
I'll double check, but I'm fairly certain that's the case.
So
because-
then you're suggesting that it should be 2 feet back from the right-of-way line,
Exactly.
which we don't know from there what that actually is yet. But that would be part of the ordinance or zoning piece right now?
I would just make
it
the
isn't.
stipulation, we'll double check the trail width, and it's where it lies within the right of way, but I believe we utilized every inch we had, fit everything we could within that corridor when that was built 10 years ago, so, but I'll double check. If there's 11 feet of concrete, between, the right-of-way line and the front edge of the trail, then the fence would only have to be a foot back of the right-of-way line. If there's 12 feet, well, it could be at the right-of-way line. But I do believe we built that back edge at or dang close to the right-of-way line.
Do they have to have a fence?
They don't have to have a fence.
That's what I thought.
Our, I believe it's Sonora's,
Yeah.
for example, our discussion with Sonora's was just some delineated area so that law enforcement could verify that alcohol was being consumed on the licensed premises, as opposed to just walking around with alcohol.
And at Bobbing Bobber, we didn't have anything.
Correct.
Again, it's not right on the trail like that, so, or sidewalk. But Sonora's is, so. It's a little different when you're actually permanently mounting something too, so.
Yeah, my fear would be if something were to happen, we have a city trail facility, somebody clips their bike, whatever happens, attorney reads the bicycle designer state aid rules, and I think they would have a case to make.
So you're blaming lawyers, right?
Would you agree with that, Mr.
If I were a
Segura?
lawyer and arguing, yeah, the bicycle.
I blame the engineers, but
So how does that work with the C3, like Dan said, with the zoning, which kind of covers, takes precedent?
well, I really believe that the alcohol ordinance would be taking precedence over necessarily the zoning, because state law gives us the ability to be more restrictive if we want to be doing that.
There you go.
Dan might not agree with that, but
So realistically, they want to have to put up a fence.
they wouldn't have to be. I have not communicated with Mr. Stolt now, but it very well might be that they thought they were doing the better thing by
Yeah.
having something more substantial or something that would be looking good, that would complement their building or whatever.
Well, I'm sure that fence isn't cheap, is it, Kent?
Oh, that's the other thing running through my mind. Yeah,
Maybe
they're gonna build something similar to Dairy Queen. They're gonna have a
hefty
Like a
fair
bill.
investment
Right.
made there.
They should communicate that.
I guess there's two ways to approach it. You could table it and ask them to have a drawing of their
the
of their
fence.
lot and where the fence is gonna be in relation to the trail, or you approve it with the stipulation that they're away from the trail, or,
Or approve it subject to the city engineer's approval,
Yeah.
whatever that might end up being.
Well, and we're gonna need planning and zoning too, so. For a fence, so.
I would make the motion to approve with the provisions that if a fence was constructed, that it would be 2 feet back from the right-of-way, and that if it's not, the tables are placed so that all general traffic would be off of the trail as well. I think that covers that. Do you think there's any need for other approval?
Well, the
I-
fence isn't gonna get approved, the zoning is still gonna have to get approved too.
Honestly, Steve, I think Mark's approach might be better. Yeah, it's subject to engineering and planning and zoning approvals, because we will firmly determine where the back edge of the trail facility is. We can easily enough do that. We don't absolutely know where the right-of-way is relative to that, but we can look for monumentation and possibly do that by staff. There should be monumentation out there. But at the very least, we can measure 10 feet and add 2 more feet on it for the clear zone, and go 12 feet from the inside edge of the trail and tell them that's where their fence can be. But we might not be able to, with certainty, determine where that right-of-way line is without making an investment
Yeah.
with the registered land surveyor or the property owner doing that. But we can simply measure 12 feet back and tell them that's where the fence needs to be.
Okay.
Yeah, because if they don't put up a fence, there's no planning and zoning requirements, so.
So I'll modify my motion to approve it with adequate review by engineering and planning and zoning staff.
I'll second that.
Motion by Steve, second by Chad to approve.
Mark, are you comfortable with that?
I am.
Okay.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
First reading of ordinance number 19-799, the ordinance of the city of Hutchinson to rezone properties at 306, 316, and 326 Franklin Street Southwest from R2 medium density residential to R4 high density residential as requested by Prince of Peace.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council. Earlier tonight on the consent agenda, you had approved much of the planning and zoning items related to the expansion project at Prince of Peace. One of the items that we couldn't have on the consent agenda is this ordinance for rezoning. You'll notice on the map here, we've got 3 lots, 306, 316, 326 Franklin, that need to be rezoned in order to accommodate the senior housing unit. So that's what you have in front of you tonight with the ordinance, and staff would recommend approval of that ordinance for the first reading.
Make that a motion.
I make a motion to approve. I don't think it
Second
needs
that.
any discussion.
I'll second it.
Motion by Dave, second by Steve. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, carried. Advertisement for bids for the 2019 recreational center gymnasium roof and exterior walls upgrade improvement project.
Mayor and council, in front of you tonight for consideration, including your council packet, are some plans and specs and cost estimates to go out for bids on a roof and wall replacement, repair project at the rec center. I know it's something that we've discussed, at least from a staff standpoint, it's been on the CIP on and off or on since for quite some time. What I emailed to you, or was included in the council packet was, and I set this on your desk, a price, that had a cost estimate of $991,257, and that includes some thin brick veneer that would be added along the outside of the wall. This afternoon, actually about 4:30, we got a second price on what that would be if that was removed. That's the second page that's included in your handout. One thing to note that's not included on the second page is that staff's estimated to be about $80,000 to $100,000 to clean and do some painting and some other repairs on the outside wall to account for what would be needed with the addition of the roof. And I'll probably hand over to Dolph and Marv to explain a little bit more on the project that we're doing, how it's expanded over the last couple of years, and why there's need for some improvements to the outside walls of the structure.
Sure. Thanks for that introduction. As Matt said, we're looking at a project to re-roof the recreation center and then do a thin brick cladding of the base from the, about 12 to 13 feet down from the roof line edge. And actually that thin brick would go over the cement block that's there. And what Matt was alluding to is if we do not include that portion within the project, then it would be time to actually clean up that cement block, which would require some pressure washing, tuck pointing, and some sealer. One of the issues that we've experienced over time, over and above the 15 years of sometimes it was raining more on the inside of the building than the outside of the building, is that we're just really having a tougher and tougher time holding paint on the interior finishes because of the moisture buildup in those walls. So as our committee spent time looking and researching alternatives from a very modest roof back in 2015, that was about a $250,000 project, which basically would just lay some tin over the top of tin. It's kind of morphed into, you almost need to peel that roof off. There's been changes made to building codes, so we have to structurally reinforce what holds that roof up. There's also fire suppression issues that weren't contemplated back in 1985. So, and also we want to be a good neighbor. So some of the discussion centered around, is there a way to make an improvement to the facade of the building that's fairly minimal in costs. You know, if you kind of back out all the numbers, it's maybe a $200,000 improvement that fits more with the character of the neighborhood and provides a material that's, you know, got a 35-year shelf life, if you will, and sets that facility well into the future and could be something that's patterned for other buildings that are on the property. The east ranks a 1976 building. The west ranks a 2000 building. At some point, they're going to need new roofs and or facades. We thought some of the suggestions that came from ISG made a lot of sense to freshen up the look of the building. Doesn't compromise if there's any future improvements to that site, which have been contemplated through the master park planning discussion that we're going to be rolling out. And the committee, I guess the building committee kind of came to the conclusion that we thought the time was right to do an improvement such as this. And it gets to nearly $1 million, at least on an estimate. Above all else, if you authorize us to move ahead with the plans and specifications and soliciting of bids, this always comes back to the council for final decisions. It certainly could be a two-step process to get to the numbers, if that was the council's intent, or it could be a singular number with a change order. I mean, any number of things depending on the council's wishes. But as the group who studied this for the past 6, 7, 8 months, our recommendation was kind of the full approach of roof and sidewall improvements, mainly because we've invested a little over $6 million with an aquatic center. We're going to be at that site for a good long time, and we think some improvements to the aesthetics of the building certainly can fit in the character of the neighborhood. And as Matt indicated, if we don't do the thin brick, we are going to need to be doing something to the exterior in terms of tuck pointing, and that'll be a reoccurring cost. Part of the reason we haven't done a lot of things at the recreation centers because we never had any money. We made cuts. There wasn't a facilities fund at any time other than the past 4 years, and quite frankly, we've been trying to make up for a lot of lost time. This thing got kicked down the road because we had a rink to do, we had a pool to do, we had outdoor buildings, we had a parks garage. There's other competing issues at the police department, the library, city center, and the amount of money that's in the pool, we try to stretch as far as we can. So we kicked a couple things down the road. We got about a $750,000 parking lot that needs some attention. That got pushed back. We've got 40-year-old ball field lights at Roberts Park that have been pushed back. 30-year-old lights at the baseball field. So I think as trying to be good stewards, maximize the resources as best we can to get the biggest bang for the buck. We've arrived tonight wanting to go out and solicit getting a price so we can really drill into what we're talking about. So I don't know if there's questions. I know Marv has a picture. There was something in your packet, but we think this is the right approach for this time and can serve the community well into the future.
One of the reasons I asked to get the price without the brick veneer is that you could always consider that, depending on the direction you wanted to go as a bid alternate to the project. Marv, do you want to show? I mean, and they've got in their packet, but that gives a.
Yes, so this is, well, Mr. Mayor and Council, thank you for the opportunity.
This is our Vanna White. So.
That one slide was 326 Franklin Street. That's where I first moved in 1980. Sad to see it gone. Anyway, this is ISG. They provided this illustration for us, and it shows basically what Dolph's been talking about. Can everybody see this okay? Mm-hmm. So we've got the thin brick, which is covering up the existing cement block. So that's going to take care of the building envelope issues that we've got, like Dolph mentioned, the water penetration coming through the walls. Part of the issue, too, is the existing roof comes all the way down to the 12-foot level. So basically, it's a roof, and then the tin is just kind of bent. And that detail is very poorly designed and allows some of the water to enter. You have to remember that this building in 1985, the model that it followed was the 1977 East Rink, which was built privately and is about as cheap as it could. So the city at that time followed that same design with a few upgrades. But in my experience, since this was built, the city has changed philosophy over cheaply building things and trying to invest a little bit more, especially with the facilities committee in the last few years. We want to try to preserve and protect what we've got. So we could go the other option and just clean up the existing cement block, but the building committee, trying to do due diligence, recommended that we go with the thin brick and the new roof, changing the color scheme as well, because right now, of course, it's white with a little bit of blue stripe on there. So now we go with more earth tones and make it a little more attractive. And like Dolph said, then eventually, when the time comes, both rinks will be updated as well.
One thing to note too, the roof, with the roof addition is actually will expand out, so we don't have the same water issues that we
Right.
have today. That's a part of the plans too.
So that with the roof expanding out, you won't get that much water behind. You know, if you just did the roof and you didn't do the brick facade, if you cleaned that all up and the roof overhang maybe more, you wouldn't have that as much
You'd
water.
have more water shedding.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right, but it certainly could be a reoccurring,
Issue.
maintenance issue. Maybe not to the degree that might be necessary today, but there would be future.
So how do you fasten the brick veneer on?
There's metal fasteners, like small studs almost, that fasten directly to the existing brick. And then insulation is added, and then the facade is attached to that.
Oh, okay. So it isn't glued on? It's
Right,
actually-
not glued on. It's
No.
mechanically fastened.
And Dan wanted, I guess, to point out, part of our discussion was the north side of that building just has a very hard time drying out.
There's no sun.
It's just, there's no sun. Right. So you get, the black streaking and, our goal, with whatever the project ends up being, it'd be to, enhance the visual integrity of the facility, whether that's cleaning up or brick veneer.
Well, if you're going to clean up, you're going to spend there'd be some dollars spent in that project.
And that's what, and that's been identified, it could be somewhere north of $70,000,
I would guess.
so.
That's man hours, that's extra work.
And it's a recurring
Be higher.
expense.
Yeah.
Right.
And, yeah.
I mean, I've been in there when the water's been inside.
Have you?
Yes, I have.
And with this improvement, this takes care of pretty much the whole exterior of the gym. The west side improvements have already been done with the aquatic center construction. So it still leaves sort of the office area in the front and back entrance that's existing. So that will have to be addressed at another time at a much lower expense. But with the exterior improvements and the interior improvements, that building is basically, looks like new. What the project also does on the interior of the ceiling, instead of just being exposed insulation, there's a metal liner it's a perforated, it should do well with acoustics, but it's just going to make that interior look a lot better than it does.
And provide insulation too.
Yeah, insulation, that's the major part of it,
Right.
the insulation on the sidewalls. No.
Yeah, and one of the things on the estimated price is we do have about a $125,000 floor that needs to be protected because they have to weld in and structurally beef up the roof. So they have to put a coat of plywood down over that entire floor so that the welding slag doesn't hit and burn. And as a parallel project, we're looking at moving to LED lighting as this happens, so that we have a lighting improvement. And just about every time we've changed lights, the price has been about in half to get the lights, and then it's cut our utility bill in half. And we think migrating to LEDs, the next logical step for that facility, especially with that new roof that'll be in place.
I like it a lot, but I guess the one thing I've thought of, I know we need the roof replaced. And you mentioned the east rink, and that actually does have an overhang, so I don't know how the rec center, got that wraparound thing like it does, but can see where that would be a problem. but also thinking that, you know, if we did the roof and had the overhang, that would help. The West Rink actually has gutters on it. The thing that I thought about was, you know, in our strategic plan and, you know, some of the park master plan, you know, we might want to do something else with that facility or expand it. And so are we throwing away some good money now? And I know it's going to be a few years out, probably be a sales tax type of thing when we have that opportunity again. But that's the only thing, you know, that I've been bouncing around. It's nice to see what the difference in cost was, because originally the roof was like $250,000 in 2018 CIP that was mentioned. So when I saw that versus 900, well, $1 million, then it's like, well, what's the difference here? And so, but it is basically, we're leaving the same roof, we're just covering that over, we're leaving the walls, we're covering that, and insulating, adding insulation.
Well, that all being said, I don't see us abandoning this facility anytime soon. You
No,
know, we're
I'm-
not gonna get our,
I'm not even saying we'd ever abandon it.
Right.
We might add on to it somehow.
so I feel the improvements are well worth it.
And that's where I threw out the idea, you know, I don't think it hurts for us to have what I would say that the base project be the lower price, and if you wanted to then have as a bid alternate, the cost for the brick veneer, and if you go out for bids, that at least breaks that out, so you have an idea of what that is, and that would also give us some time to hone in on what we actually do to fix and clean up, so you can use that for some comparisons if that's the route you want to go out, if you can, you know, for bids. Like I said, all we're asking for is to do an advertisement for bids, and we're, you know, obviously if it comes in at 1.4, 1.5 million, we're gonna have a lot more discussion on that project.
I would make that a motion, Matt, with your suggestion, with the alternative bid for the brick veneer.
I'll second.
Motion by Chad, second by Mary. Any other discussion?
Has there ever been a structural,
Yes. We did that as
Assessment?
part of this project, and that's part of the reason why the roof's a little more than the $250,000 that we had in 2015, because we didn't foresee some of the issues. Now they've been fully disclosed, and we understand that it
Seems
does
like
need to get
it's-
beefed up, and
Seems like a lot of that's even the fire
And
piece,
the, and, yeah,
protecting.
it's the $50,000 worth of fire suppression. It's very important to our customers.
I would note that there is already some bid alternates included, at least it looked that way in the plans on this one page, so, so this would just be another one that.
Yeah, I think, you know, we had, you know, it kind of gets down to what products are you going to use on the facility. We've talked about metal clad. I mean, they're just doing amazing things with, you know, metal these days, or EFS, or thin brick, or, you know, just any number of things. So I think they're, you know, as ISG worked on this, is they wanted to give us plenty of options to choose from that would be able to kind of stand the test of time a little bit and give us a favorable price. So it wasn't a one-size-fits-all, and we really worked through all the details with our committee and had, you know, a lot of discussion. And ISG and the people that built the building initially were consulted as well. And you get that kind of history, it can help you put together a pretty good project, we think.
Dolph, do you know, is that foam-filled block that they have in there now or
I'm
not?
not sure.
What's the question?
Are the blocks
Foam-filled
full film
block?
or how?
Or is there any
There are two separate
insulation?
walls. There's a 4-inch wall
Oh.
with insulation, and there's
Okay.
another 8-inch wall inside that.
You still get moisture
Oh,
transfer?
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
And it's because of the detail of how they set that roof on top of that block wall. It just, the water does not shed off that building. It just comes straight down the side. It's like a wick.
We have the same issues at the, well, actually both rinks, but especially the East Rink, that the moisture penetrates through the block and it's hard to keep the paint on those outside walls.
Any other discussion? I'll call a motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
Thank you.
Thanks, gentlemen. Request for proposal for city marketing and branding initiative.
Mayor and council, this was discussed at our last meeting. There were some suggested changes to the RFP. I've noted those within the board action form. Note those in red and crossouts, and then I've also provided a clean version of it. I've also provided some timelines to when, this would go out, what the expectations would be for getting them returned. Once again, this is just an RFP soliciting proposals to kind of give us an idea of what would be out there for options, along with costs relating to our branding and marketing initiative that we've discussed.
I'll make a motion to approve the request.
Second.
Motion by Chad, second by Steve. Any other discussion on it? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Direction on the city plat map.
I've heard Mary loud and clear. So I wanted to bring this back. Last time we talked about this was actually the end of 2017. I think we even talked about it a little bit in the beginning of 2018. There was some discussion about, wanting to keep those here at City Center. There was some discussion about giving them to the Historical Society, and they'd get us some copies. And there wasn't, I guess, a clear direction from the council on what they wanted to do with that. And so we had said, we go out and look at some options for preservation ourselves. And we did talk with a company called Mid-America Business Systems, who actually does quite a bit of storage preservation for whether it's historic societies, or I think right now they're working with one of the casinos on some stuff. And so, what we were able to get is at least a price, and I want to at least present to the council, would be an option right now to store some stuff. One of the things that we talked about as staff is that eventually somewhere down the road, we need to really have a full room that's dedicated towards something. But I know there's been some questions on what are we gonna do with the plat maps. And so really, I think some of the options were to have them stored at the county, or keep them here at city, but store them in more a preservation type of system. I guess I wanted to at least provide that system option for you, and then try to get some direction on what you would like staff to do.
Is there a way, or that we could, I think your thoughts, Mary, are to preserve these but still have copies.
Oh,
in
absolutely,
place of
and the
them,
museum
correct?
does that. They make digital copies, they make those, they're not digital, what do they call
Yeah,
them?
digital,
It's
yeah.
digital, and they would look just like that. But as far as we know, these are the most original ones that we have. No. And they do fade, and they have faded. And when that history's gone, it's gone. So we should have copies in here, and these should either be put into a cabinet like this, or the museum holds them.
You've mentioned we have other documents that should be preserved too.
Yeah, I mean, some of that is even just simply required by state law. We've hung on to them, but as I really looked at this, we need to probably have a full, you've seen some of those pictures, I think, but we need to have really a full room that probably becomes really our storage system. That's somewhere down the road. This will help us in the meantime, and then eventually, when we probably look at doing some upgrades to this building, that we'd look at doing a more secure room for our historical documents.
I would like us to purchase that. I'd like to keep them in our possession, but have a copy made to post it. But then, you know, it's a start of preserving some of these other documents that we're required to preserve as well. But have it, instead of just a room, have a fireproof and have it in place that protects things from the lighting and that's humidity and temperature controlled. So respect, this cabinet doesn't appear to be temperature and, or
I'm not sure if it's
humidity,
temperature,
but they do have some vents and
yeah.
stuff, but they are fire
Yeah.
protected.
No, and that's, I think it's really a combination of what we talked about, like I said, because I know, and I obviously have to talk with the new director about getting those in a more preserved, because I don't want to just take them off the wall,
Right.
get them copied and put them in they really need to have, those need to be preserved along with a copy of them, but then basically we're going to hang on to them ourselves, so.
As far
Right.
as the $6,000,
I'm not, that's, yeah, that's all within my threshold, and then we can easily take care of that. I just wanted to really have an idea of what we wanted to do. I know I have it on there as approved tonight, but I really don't even need action from the council. There was some uncertainty before, like I said, this is at a threshold that I can address, but just wanted to make sure that we're comfortable with that direction, so.
I'm fine with that.
That's fine, that's all I need to know, so.
Okay.
Great. Governance, update to the city policies, employee uniform and clothing policy, and safety clothing and protective clothing and equipment policy.
Hey, good evening, Mayor, Council. Tonight we have two policies in front of you. These policies haven't been reviewed for quite some time. The first one I'll speak to briefly is the uniform and clothing policy, which was last updated in 2003. So the main objective behind the policy revision is to bring our policy into compliance with the IRS. Right now, we are not in compliance. So that means when we reimburse an employee for jeans, for example, that's one of our big reimbursements, the IRS considers jeans a taxable benefit to that employee. We paid for it, it's a taxable benefit to the employee. Because the IRS's definition of a uniform is more in line with what your police officers and fire chiefs wear. Jeans can be worn anywhere. They can be worn to the grocery store, they can be worn to church or whatnot. So in the eyes of the IRS, unfortunately, jeans are not a uniform, and we need to start taxing our employees if we're going to be paying for their jeans. And similarly with polo shirts or any long sleeve shirts, short sleeve shirts that we provide with the city logo on the shirt, the IRS deems that as clothing as well and a taxable benefit. So the big push behind the new policy is to bring it in compliance with the IRS. And then the other big change that you may have noticed is instead of reimbursing employees for purchases made, we're proposing that we give each employee that qualifies, depending on their position, an allowance, a clothing allowance, and we'd pay that out 2 times during the year. And the theory behind that allowance is that's going to reimburse the employees for the jeans they need to purchase. But then it's easier to administrate from the city standpoint because we can do it all in one payroll, withhold all the taxes, versus the reimbursement method, which is through the accounts payable system, and we actually cut them a check. To go that route, it's a little more, I don't want to say inconvenient, but it's more work from the city standpoint to have to cut a disbursement check and then go into the payroll system and then also withhold taxes. So the allowance method in my mind is the most efficient, streamlined way to do this process if we're going to conform with the IRS, which I would advise that we do conform with the IRS. Any questions on the uniform and clothing policy?
And notice coats, you'd think park staff, winter time and Creekside.
That falls
you know,
under
would that
safety.
be-
Yeah, coats, we're trying to push departments to the reflective type gear,
Mhm.
which would fall under the PPE
PPE.
policy we're gonna
Yeah.
speak to next.
Okay.
So as long as we can push them to the PPE, the IRS doesn't consider that a taxable benefit.
Okay.
I will note the dollar amounts that we came up with was based off of just our, going back and looking a couple of years of what the average expenses were, based off of our past policy. So obviously it's something we'll have to keep an eye on, and you look at from, not necessarily from year to year, but, as costs go up, something we would look at in the future, so.
Actually thought it was a little generous, I think $50 a pair of jeans and,
Well, you have to consider that $250 is gonna be taxed, so they might net only about $210 after tax. So then we're looking at about a $40 pair of jeans if they get five pairs.
yeah.
And the
If I go
average we
through
identified
five,
was in that $33, $34 range,
Yeah.
average. I'll just touchly brief on, or go through the PPE policy as well. This was last updated in 2008, and PPE stands for the Personal Protection Equipment, in case you were wondering. But this policy is really differentiating itself from the clothing and uniform policy. So anything covered within this policy, as I mentioned earlier, would not be a taxable benefit to the employee. So there's two different areas to this policy. There's the PPE that the city departments supply the employees, such as the hard hats, the helmets, safety vests. But then there's also the PPE that the employee is responsible for buying, and then the city reimburses for those items, such as safety toe boots and winter boots, safety eyeglasses. So two components that the city will reimburse for. Well, on the one, the city pays the full cost. And then on the other one, where the employee is reimbursed, there are certain amounts we'll reimburse up to. And then we'll also only reimburse one time within a certain amount of, a certain time frame, whether that's one time in 2 years we reimburse for boots, or one time in a year for safety eyeglasses. So in a nutshell, that's the personal protection equipment policy. That one's short and sweet. But at this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have, and then.
For the PPE, about hearing protection or gloves, work gloves.
Right. Anything they need in the line of their work duties to protect themselves.
I guess I just didn't see those listed, and that's all. It's more eyeglass and other types of clothing.
Yeah, gloves are normally purchased, I don't want to say in bulk, but departments will buy that through their operating supply budget and supply them to their employees as needed, I would imagine, right, Dolph?
Yep, and then in our operation, we have like a vending machine, so you have a code number that you put in, so you have to go in, so we know how many employees take safety glasses. We can kind of monitor that to make sure people aren't just losing that stuff. So it's a nice check and balance want to provide it all so they're safe, but we also want to have some controls on it so it isn't just kind of help yourself.
About hearing protection, Creekside equipment.
Yeah, chaps,
operators.
everything for the forestry operations that comes under PPE, and it's purchased and reimbursed, sometimes through the employee or sometimes through the department. And then it's just an invoice AP process.
Yes, I guess a good question that didn't get brought up, whether we include hearing protection in this policy and safety gloves.
Technically, it is PPE.
Non-prescription eyeglasses, that'd be safety glasses still, versus the standard ones that the city provides. Just wondering why offer reimbursement for somebody to buy their own non-prescription.
Versus wearing a goggle or a safety glass, or?
Yeah. Since we offer standard non-prescription safety glasses supplied by the city, so. May be substituted at the director's discretion, it says.
I don't know if you, Kent, is there much of a differentiation between a non-prescription eyeglass and safety glasses? It was in the previous policy as well, and I guess.
Contact lenses. Am I tracking your question correctly, Steve? I mean, with
I'm just trying to understand what
Do
a
you have a sight?
non-prescription eyeglass
Yeah.
would be.
I think it's people with a sight deficit where they need, eyeglasses or contact lenses, so you have to basically get a prescription safety glass. Allows for that opportunity. Some people don't desire to wear contact lenses or some people
No,
don't have the
there's-
ability to, I guess.
There's a prescription eyeglasses,
Okay.
safety glasses that's included, and then it says non-prescription eyeglasses
Right.
under the safety glasses.
Right, it's
So
a
no correction.
non-prescription that he's questioning. And I don't know
Yeah.
if that's used much even. It was.
No, I don't know what that would apply to.
Non-prescription, it's their $2.99 a pair from
Yeah, exactly.
the company, and they buy them by the case.
Yeah.
But I do have a few employees that have prescription glasses.
Yeah,
They get those through their.
I fully agree with that. It just, the non-prescription ones, there is a reimbursement for that, even though we provide
And I don't know if we've
freebies.
had anybody do
Yeah.
that because we just provide.
My assumption, Steve, is that was in the previous policy and was just brought forth. But,
I don't think we've ever had anybody say, I want to wear these safety glasses, I'd like a reimbursement. It's, you wear what we provide, we ask,
Yeah.
what do you guys like? Because some want clear, some want smoke colored, some want UV,
and that's something we can easily,
The one thing
Bring
would
back.
be kind of thinking about it, and I don't know what kind of safety glasses you provide, but some of them have like a bifocal built into
Bifocal,
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's, one of my staff people had bifocals too, so it was safety bifocals.
Be like a reading glass kind of built into it, so that could be.
But he retired, so.
Well, we can clean that up a bit and bring that back another time. What are your thoughts, Matt?
yeah, like I said, it's tough because I'd want to get some feedback from our staff because obviously it's been in there for, I'm assuming it was relating to somebody, maybe not. I'm
Right.
not sure.
Well, I don't know, you need to bring it back. I think it's pretty
Yeah.
clear.
Just corrected.
Run with that after you clean it up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd be fine with that too.
Okay. Thank you.
Need a motion to
Yep.
approve
Wait,
it?
I'll make a motion to approve them.
I'll second.
Motion by Chad, second by Mary to approve. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, carried. We have snow removal and ice control report for March 2019. City of Hutchinson financial report and investment reports for March 2019. Hutchinson Housing and Redevelopment Authority board minutes from March 19th, 2019. Planning Commission minutes from February 19th, 2019. Planning Zoning Building Department quarterly report. Dolph, you got anything else for us?
No.
Andy, you have anything else for us?
Nothing for me.
All right. Kent?
One thing, frost boils and we just.
I don't even see
There's
him.
more than
Oh,
one.
that's right.
Yeah, you don't, huh?
My
I don't
road's
think you can go
closed, I
that one
can't get
direction
down
anymore.
there.
Yeah, we've started to take inventory, put some numbers to it. There's obviously a significant issue out there. I think we're gonna be talking more at Resource Allocation Committee, like we've done in the past, and just a little trip down memory lane, just to give you an idea of the scope of the issue out there. And I think it has, cost-wise, it has something to do with the bituminous paving prices we're seeing nowadays. It's definitely more expensive on the patching, bituminous patching front, but 2008, we had about $35,000 worth of frost boil repairs. 2010, and this is above and beyond our regular maintenance, contract repair and maintenance efforts that we do every summer. 2010, we were at about $69,000. 2011, we were at $100,000, but that didn't include 3 streets that we rehabilitated. If you might remember, Robert Street, Jackson Street, and a portion of Bradford. Yeah, and the street right next to those is now blowing up this winter, Lakeview, that stretch that parallels those streets. Yeah, so it was $100,000 worth of patching plus $326,000 worth of project work. Obviously, all of that project work wasn't pavement related, but a fair share of it was. So we've started to size up the areas and assign recent unit prices. We're looking at an issue around the $150,000 mark, give or take. So we'll be talking more about it. Obviously, we don't want to touch those areas for some time here anyways, so we have time to digest this and figure out how we're going to address it. Our project load really doesn't allow us much from a project standpoint to address this issue, so we're going to have to talk more about it. And the reality of it is you really can't do much with those areas for probably another 2 to 3 weeks. Obviously, you've seen the one down by you, Gary, and yeah, I believe we closed the road. John and I talked about that. We were going to button it up tight the end of last year. I haven't been out there since then, but yeah.
It's almost like the high water again, because people drive down this to look at how bad it is.
So that's.
I saw a guy go through the one on Michigan the other day, and he must have come about 2.5 feet off the ground. He looked like he was out bobsledding or something.
Yeah, no, I struggle with this, and John and I talked a lot about Arch Street. We left it open maybe a hair too long in my mind, but we did close it up finally. But some of these areas, they're passable. But like you say, Dave, you shouldn't hit them going 30 miles an hour by any means.
They are marked with...
Yeah, I believe they all have cones, which is probably about the best we can do in the short term.
You had to be daydreaming because to go directly right over the top of it was like funny.
But that's where, when we talked about the surplus from last year, there's an opportunity we kind of knew was probably going to be hanging out there, so.
True.
Mm-hmm.
But I think every city's got the same problem. That don't make it right or wrong, but
Yes, cities, counties, it's a significant issue out there, and that goes back to the cost of the repairs that we're anticipating. And, this 150 number might be on the lowest side because bituminous contractors have a fair amount of work right now anyways that they didn't get done last year, and now the new season started, and some of them might not be too interested in doing patching work no matter what the price is, honestly.
The alley situation, the few that I've seen, it looked like they went down and dragged them.
Yep, they've been out getting on the ones we can get on.
They're looking pretty good.
Yep, so they're starting to take shape. We're in week 2, yeah.
I'll thank the residents for working with us. We suspended garbage service down the alleys just because of the damage. We were concerned. This is something probably for a future discussion. I've worked in previous cities where They literally, every year, it was part of policy that from a certain time of the month they did not allow alley service, and that might have to be something that we consider looking at in the future, just so we're maybe not scrambling. It's simply April 1st to, middle of May, you build that into expectations for everyone, so.
That would be easier.
Yeah.
Call an alley emergency policy, just like the snow emergency.
Well, and I mean, like I said, I think about, one community where we had several gravel alleys, that was, it was, you send your notice out, okay, the alley restriction is now in effect. And it's the same, 4 or 5 weeks every year. And it's just,
road restrictions on weight.
yeah,
Yeah.
so.
Well, John Olson and I have been, what Matt just mentioned there, we've been talking about that concept for years. I think the one thing we've always defaulted to, it's a good concept and I'd definitely be supportive of it, but the one thing we have working in our favor is we only have one garbage hauler in this community where, you go to others, like the one I live in, there's 5 of them that come on different days of the week. And so, I mean, that's the one thing we got in our favor, but this year was, yeah, I mean, people couldn't pass those alleys with a vehicle. We certainly didn't want a garbage truck going down those, even the paved ones, because those paved alleys are built on somewhat of a suspect subgrade that doesn't drain very well. Every alleys were created to drain the backyards, and that's where that water sits in that subsurface. So even when you pave them with blacktop, you don't want a garbage truck on top of them this time of year, especially when they're this soft.
Honestly, that's what happened to Arch Street, because if you go down and look, you can see duels going right through them. And
Yep.
she popped her up real good, so, but no, I kind of echo what Matt said. I think the residents were understanding, I mean, now that they can see that how much less damage it's doing to keeping those, the trucks off the alleys, it sure helps, so. Anything
That's it.
else? Mark?
Nothing else tonight.
Chad, how about you? Let's start with you tonight.
2 things. So Kent, you might not know off the top of your head, but does the city maintain the trail in front of the middle school on South Grade Road?
Yes. Within the South Grade Road right away. I
Okay.
believe, correct off, I think it is. Yeah. Yeah, that's our trail, I'm fairly certain.
Can we look at doing a similar treatment to the trail that we did by Culvers and Menards, where like the cracks get filled in? Because the contractor that did that work did an excellent job, in my opinion, and
Yeah, no, John's been doing some great approaches to those trails. I've been down there, I think I heard that one's pretty sore, but I've
yeah,
been.
I mean, we're gonna lose a 7th grader out there, I feel like. The gaps are getting pretty big this year, like, it's pretty jarring when you're riding, but, somebody's gonna trip and break their leg or something.
No, John has definitely figured out how to spread some maintenance dollars onto
Sure.
trails and been successful.
Yep,
In
and
that
in all
Highway 15
seriousness,
area and Century Avenue area.
Like the contractor that did the work over by Menards and Culvers, I
Yep.
mean, that is like glass now, you can't tell where the cracks were, but. And also, did we want to schedule a chicken workshop at all? We don't have any workshops in May.
Potentially. We just have to get something. I mean, I would, if you want to do something before your next council meeting at 4 o'clock, because I know the second meeting in May will probably be our first budget workshop. I know it's already getting. to be
Budget
that
work?
time.
Good. I know you're excited about that.
That'd be fine with me.
So I guess that's up to the rest of the council if they wanted, I would say, the first meeting in May, if you do your regular 4 o'clock workshop, that would be the time to do it.
I would make that a motion.
That's the 8th?
It'd be the
8th of May?
14th.
14th.
8th.
That'll give us 3 weeks.
14th of May, okay.
That'll give us 3 weeks to at least pull some stuff together.
Yeah.
4 o'clock.
No, I would make that a motion.
I'll second it.
Motion by Chad, second by Dave to set the workshop for the chicken ordinance.
93.47.
Well,
I have no
and there's
idea.
gonna be just a lot of things that are gonna be needed to consider about that. You know, just sitting here, and I'm sure Dan Jocum's thinking the same thing, is, you know, we currently have this accessory structure ordinance under our zoning code. You get one extra building on your property and that's it. So you're gonna have your chicken coop or your shed, one of those things is gonna go. You know, so there's just a lot of things to think about.
There goes my chickens.
Yeah,
Or we amend that ordinance to allow chicken coop.
yeah, I mean,
Zoning.
Yeah.
And you have to take into consideration lot coverage and.
absolutely, because
Certain
some of
areas
the
that-
lots are really small to
Well, and
begin
that's gonna be
with.
another consideration is,
Floodplain areas.
well, and by the time you get done with all the setbacks and the accessory buildings and everything else, you know, there might be very few places in town that are gonna be able to have chickens. And then how do you react to the people that say, hey, I'm not being treated fairly because so-and-so gets chickens and I don't?
They can,
And,
I mean,
is
it's
it,
all like anything else,
Yep.
you know, that has some setbacks, so.
I mean, for those of us that live with, I'm just thinking about myself, that live with the river, there's, you know, we've got tighter restriction, you know, within so many feet of the river. I mean, that's, you know, a lot of that's gonna play into.
It is, but it's, on the other hand, you don't have any of those considerations if you have a dog.
Yeah.
Right?
So,
Mhm.
Too.
so.
All right, well, that's all I had.
You do have a motion in a second, Gary.
well,
Yeah.
and why is this such a big rush? I mean, because they want to get the chickens in May? That's the whole ticket, right?
Yeah.
I
Well,
don't
we-
think you can
it
get
won't
chickens
happen.
after May.
Yeah,
Well, I'm
we
just
have
saying, I don't think we need to delay it. I mean, we don't have anything going on that meeting. We could certainly get the ball rolling.
Right.
Any other discussion?
2020.
Yeah, this isn't going to happen this year.
Well, it
I mean,
it
I
could
don't-
really because of,
We're drafting ordinances.
I know
I mean, is
people
this,
that
are we just
out-
going to rush
yeah.
right through this and say,
Well,
okay, go for it?
What
rush,
is
but
the
it-
rush? I mean,
Well, I
Yeah.
wouldn't say we're rushing, but we could at least get the ball rolling. I mean,
Well, actually, you can get laying hens anytime. You don't have to start out with chicks, so.
country that would be
Yeah.
half a dozen hens.
Right. I mean, I'm not opposed to having a workshop. I just want to make sure we have everything set right and legally. And like, you know, here, somebody's got this little tiny lot and they already got they got a garage and a shed on there and now they're going to put,
Well, I just
chicken
think
coop.
those are some of the things we're gonna have to identify in that
Right.
workshop.
hey,
Any other discussion on it?
we've had too much.
let's put the chickens to bed.
Call a motion, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, carried. So Mary, now you don't have your ducks in a row, but you got your chickens in a row, right?
I just thinking all the free eggs she could get.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Mary, do you have anything for us?
I was just going to ask Dolph, since you're here, you want to give us a little update on the tennis courts? On the pickleball courts and the tennis courts? I see they're
Started
gone.
removing fencing, and they'll be putting security fencing up tomorrow, because there is a school right adjacent to the project. So they'll, you know, start doing their thing. Hopefully, they'll be playing pickleball or tennis on them the tail end of July. The school starts their project at the high school when the high school tennis season concludes. So for 6 weeks, you'll have to play at the fairgrounds, which is fine.
Right. Thank you for that
Yeah.
update. One other thing. Kent? When are they going to start sweeping streets, do you know?
They have.
Oh, they haven't gone down on the street.
Yeah, it's been
I
ongoing.
swept mine today.
Obviously, the weather threw a week or so ago, but threw a wrench
Forget
into
we had
it.
snow a week ago.
I know. It's just that there's so much in the streets and with rain coming again, you know, it's
Yeah.
like, I don't want that all down on our drains either.
Yeah.
You know,
And the other, we're awaiting our new street sweeper too, so the larger machine.
Right.
Should be delivered here. Well, when John and I talked about it a week ago, he thought about a week or so, so it should be coming
soon.
soon, if not already here, so.
Okay.
Yeah, so you're exactly right. It might not be as noticeable due to our equipment limitations right now, but it'll definitely pick up.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
That's it.
Thanks, Mary. Dave?
No, I've just got entertained really well this evening, so I don't have anything, and no one's approached me on anything that they have concerns with, so I think we're good to go.
All righty. Steve?
Two things. One, we approved the South Grade Road plans and are going out, preparation of the report and stuff. And looking back, what we've historically been doing then is we have the public hearing, we have the plans and specs, and then we have another resolution ordering the advertisement for bids at that same meeting. And I thought the Fifth Avenue project, we had a lot of people talking. There was a lot of conversation after it. It just, with emails and stuff and from residents, it just seemed like, made me think that, why don't we separate that, have the public hearing and where we approve the plans and specs, but then wait till the next meeting for advertising for bids. I don't know, Matt, what you've seen other places or?
There's some background, and it has more so to do, and you're exactly right, Steve. I wouldn't mind doing it in that way, although this is how it was when I arrived here many years ago. Not to say that's right. But it's even more so now important what we've done from a council. It's where our council meetings align with the leader publication for dates. And everybody on the front end, us, city staff, administration wise, are requiring council items earlier and what was in the past even, and likewise for the leader with respect to their publication dates. And we're already struggling, to meet all the publication requirements. When you order that, we have to have that. We can't even get it in the paper that next Wednesday. Our advertisement day lands on Wednesday, ends up being our first advertisement day. And so we're already out 2 weeks.
But we don't have to publish for, do we? Maybe that's where because I would look back to when I started as mayor and we actually did have that separation. We weren't doing both of them at the same time, and somewhere in there it got changed.
Yeah.
But my understanding is we don't have to have a notice for actually ordering the advertisement for bids. We do need.
You don't have to have a public hearing to do the
No.
advertisement for bids.
But you need to order.
As far as,
Yeah, the resolution to order for advertisement for bids.
yeah,
That's the second resolution.
yeah. But so what's the problem with, you're
Because
saying?
we end up struggling with the dates, because why we put all those on that meeting is because we can't, our lead advertisement
You're gonna push
date
everything
is
back
with
to-
the leader, and we can't, when you approve stuff on Tuesday nights, we can't advertise on Wednesday,
So it's actually.
tomorrow.
Yeah,
So now we're 2 weeks out regardless. And then we have to advertise for 3 weeks, a minimum of 3 weeks.
and we still are bound to advertise in the leader,
Yes.
because
It has
we
to
do
be-
online,
It has to be the local.
and that's
Yeah.
part of
Paper
that.
of
I know the
record.
newspapers have
Yeah.
held on.
They've got good lobbyists still. So you might be right thinking back, we did group those together at some point, because we really started to struggle with council packet dates and the leaders out till Friday now to advertise, Friday noon to advertise in the Wednesday paper.
Can't,
Yeah.
didn't the paper used to come out on different dates?
It did.
Because didn't it used to come out like on Tuesday?
Yes,
and
and that was the
Thursday,
other dynamic.
Right?
Yeah.
It was Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yep.
It is a timing thing, but
Yeah.
if you do that, you now really push everything back. And you could do that,
Farther.
you know, and I know Steve and I had talked, this, in my previous places, this is the first place that does it like we do. It doesn't mean it's right or wrong. A lot of times it was that. But you start the process a lot earlier, and you have to just plan that out if that's the route you're gonna do, knowing that, okay, we're not gonna do that action on the same night, and so now you've really pushed everything back additional 2 weeks.
It gets to be more than 2 weeks with all the dates play out,
Yeah.
but, and I
Ends
think
up
the
being
bigger
about 3 or
issue,
4.
Gary just hit the nail on the head now. It used to be Thursday,
yeah.
so you could
Tuesday
take
and
action
Thursday.
on Tuesday night, and we could have stuff to
Tuesdays
the leader
and-
at
Tuesdays
noon on
and
Wednesday
Thursdays.
and have it in the Thursday paper. Now they want to stay away from legal notices in the Saturday, Sunday, whatever you call the weekend paper.
Yeah,
Saturday.
Saturday.
You know, so we're
Saturday.
pushed to Wednesdays from an advertisement standpoint, yeah. Yeah, it's,
So I mean, that's something you just need to take into consideration. If you do push it, that's something you wanna make a change on, it is gonna push things back.
Okay, well, it's good points. The second thing was just thinking about the rec center project, and we have council members on the resource allocation committee that work with, you know, Kent and the infrastructure things, but I'm not even sure who's on the facility committee, who's on the fleet committee, and why wouldn't we have a council member on those too? That both committees that some very important projects and high bucks, and I think it would help communication and understanding of things as it progresses, just like what it does with the resource allocation.
You know, and I don't know the history on those. My assumption it was to help, obviously, better plan. Why council was not included, I'm not sure. I'm assuming it's probably some sort of internal. I don't think we necessarily would be opposed. I think it helps when you get to where we were tonight, to have at least one council member have some history on why we're at where we're at. You know, from that, you know, especially when you consider the council basically gives the facility fund $700,000 a year. And now, obviously, we get into projects that end up being approved by here, but a lot of times you guys are coming in on the back end of that.
All the planning
Of-
that went into it up ahead.
Yeah,
It's kind of how the resource allocation actually got started too.
yeah.
That's it.
Thanks, Steve. Matt?
Early bird registration for the league's annual conference is April 30th, so if you're interested in going to that, it'd be good to let me know. I know I included it in the email to you, but we were selected for the Blandon Leadership. And right now, it's looking like probably February of 2020 is when that would probably start off. And then we did receive word today that we received an OSHA grant, amount of $10,000 to help with some equipment out at Creekside. So that we had a safety inspection, and they noted something we had a problem with, and so we were able to apply and get some money for that. So that's it from me. So,
Thanks, Matt. Well, kind of along with Kent and what Mary was talking about, please clean out your catch basin. You know, I went and took care of mine as the water was a couple feet deep. So, that, and just thanks again for the people understanding about the alley, so. With that, adjournment's in order.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Steve. Motion by Steve, second by Chad to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.